people in person. It's great to have everyone here. Do I have an actual script for the beginning of the meeting now? Since we're here, most of us are here. Thanks, I appreciate that. Hello, everyone. I'm Mary Jones. I serve as chair of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the board to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that's being conducted in hybrid form, with some individuals remote by conference call or other electronic medium, and some individuals present at the board office. David Anderson.
Present.
Linda Heitzman Powell.
Present.
Donna Horner-Quell.
Present.
Jim Martin, I don't believe is here today. Jacqueline Lightcap.
Here.
Richard Nobles.
Present.
Laura Shaughnessy.
Present.
Stevens. Here. Okay. I note the following staff members are also present: David Fye.
Here.
Leslie Allen.
Here.
And Cindy Durkle.
Here.
Tim Resner, serving as legal counsel for the board, is also present. Next, David Pyle read a message regarding this meeting being held remotely.
This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee or the board about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the board to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. To ensure the board has sufficient time to review all items on the agenda, one individual has been approved to provide public comment for not more than 5 minutes. Because we are conducting this public meeting by hybrid form, I state for the record the following information. Access to this meeting is being conducted in person and by a medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting in person and through the use of the conference call or by viewing the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted in hybrid form, the requirements of KOMA are not suspended. As such, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On April 19th, 2024, we sent notice of the board meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of board meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other media material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by email by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allow the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And we did check the conference call line before the meeting started. There's no one currently on the conference call line, but I'll let you know if I hear someone enter the room.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Next item of business is the agenda approval. If everyone's had a chance to review the agenda, are there any additions, edits, changes? If not, I'll take a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Thank you. Second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Sign. Great, thank you. Next item of business is public comment from Dr. Brianna McGew. Sorry about that. Concerning vetoed 2024 Senate Bill 233. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. As mentioned, I'm Dr. Brianna McGew. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Social Welfare at the University of Kansas. I teach in the MSW program, primarily clinical practice classes. My research primarily focuses on mental health interventions for LGBT folks. And I am a proud MSW license holder in the state of Kansas. If you want to note that the comments I'm making today are made in a personal capacity and not on behalf of the university. And I'm here to request that the BSRB take more proactive action related to gender and care bans in the state. While Senate Bill 233 failed on this past legislative session, a bill that included social transition among some of the restricted gender and care policies. I want to note that we saw a gender and care ban in the previous legislative session, and I think it's incredibly likely that we're going to see future bans in the future. So while this current bill failed, I think it's incredibly likely that this issue isn't sort of resolved and final. I think bills such as this put social workers and other mental health providers in a really difficult spot. On one hand, gender affirming care has been linked due to a robust body of research to reduce depression, suicide ideation, and gender dysphoria among transgender youth. Furthermore, well-established care guidelines such as those advanced in W class that encourage social transition as a critical part of mental health care for clients. And the NASW Code of Ethics requires social workers to employ the best available evidence in support their clients. And I think all of these things are kind of fundamentally at odds with the gender affirming care bans that we've been seeing in Kansas and other states. And fundamentally, this puts mental health providers in a really difficult spot, particularly because these bills threaten to revoke the licenses of social workers and other mental health providers who are providing this kind of care. As the licensing board will be implicated in the revocation of licenses, strongly encourage you all to take a stand. And I would say even if it's not possible to explicitly take a stand on the policies, even providing clarity as to how they would potentially be enforced would be an incredible asset to social workers who are trying to provide care to trans and gender diverse youth. These bills just create considerable confusion. I'm definitely seeing that in the classroom as students are trying to figure out how the heck they can provide care for trans youth. So I think your guidance, even in providing clarity, could improve practice with trans kids, reducing pretty robust misinformation that was flying around during the legislative session. And honestly, I think we really impactful and potentially preventing lawsuits both against care providers and potentially the BSRB. So in sum, I do think gender affirming care bans in the state are a really critical issue pertaining to mental health licensure. I really strongly encourage you all to take proactive actions to try to minimize the harm that these kinds of bills have.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for your comments.
And I did bring a couple copies of Senate Bill 233. So if any board members would like to review the text of those documents, you're welcome to. So I'll just go ahead and forward that right there around the table, and then you can just kind of share it amongst yourselves. That'd be great.
Thank you very much.
David, did we have a copy of that in our packet?
Happy to send one electronically as well, if that would be preferred.
Okay, would you please? Thank you.
I'll be happy to do it.
Yeah, I think some of those bills in the legislative update, excuse me, David's been circulating for the board so that we can stay up to date on what's happening in the legislative session. Any question or comments? Thank you very much, Dr. for being here today. We appreciate your voice.
And I'm also happy to answer any questions by email if anything comes up.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, next item of business is review and approval of minutes from the board meeting from March 11th. Could we just the minutes be approved? Thank you so much. I'll do second with, is that David Stephen? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign? Great, Dave, we'll move on to you for the executive director's report.
Okay, thanks, Mary. I will try to summarize some of these items for operations first. We are continuing to broadcast our meetings for board and advisory committee meetings. That is continuing to go well. We're able to answer questions from individuals, especially at conference when they're considering doing some of the same action, but I think it provides really good transparency, and it's led to a lot of good questions where we're able to help people out with certain information. In terms of other outreach efforts, Leslie, Allen, and I have continued to make presentations to schools. Just recently, we've been able to go on site for some of these presentations, which has been really valuable. We're continuing to do that more. We had some really good discussions with some groups, talked to a group of social work students at Newman University, some social work students at Pitt State, some addiction counseling students at Washburn, and then there were others too that I've kind of highlighted in my report, but lots of good questions. And it is helpful for us to make those contacts. So we're going to continue to do that on behalf of the agency. The next item, I was contacted by a group, the Governor's Behavioral Health Center for Excellence, and they had requested some information on different items the BSRB has done in the last few years in terms of workforce. And so I put together a presentation for them and just kind of summarize some of the major changes and statutes, and then also some of the efforts the board has taken to update and make changes to the regulations for the professions and presented to that group. And they were very appreciative of that. I think it was scheduled for about half an hour and it ended up going about 45 minutes with all the questions and a lot of positive feedback. And they wanted me to communicate back to you all as board members. They truly do appreciate your efforts that you're making in terms of workforce, and they want you to know that they're seeing that and really appreciate that. In terms of the next item, the Behavioral Health Workforce Policy Academy. So this is a national association that had offered essentially to partner with states to dedicate resources towards looking at more workforce type initiatives. And the way we were contacted about it was representatives from the Kansas Department for Aging and Disability Services reached out and said that KDES had applied for some of these type of academies in the past and had been awarded those. And it basically pairs you up with representatives from the association. They're able to meet with you and kind of work with you and provide essentially more creative ways to think about new workforce type measures. And so we applied for that policy academy, and I found out, I believe just on either Thursday or Friday of last week, that we were awarded that. So we'll be working with representative KDADs and also the Board of Regents as well to try to come up with some new strategies. And so making good partnerships around the state and connecting those ties in really positive ways. So, and then I was been speaking to some individuals with the behavior analyst association here in Kansas. They have a presentation they have asked me to do in July, kind of a lunch and learn for some of their members. And so, so I'll be talking with some of their licensees as well coming up here in a couple of months. So I just kind of want to make you aware of that. In terms of the next update on revenue, I included a new document in your packet today. Just kind of wanted to share more information on revenues and expenditures and kind of show you where we started of the year. So basically, this has to do with a cash balance report of where we currently stand at the beginning of the fiscal year, which was essentially July 1st of 2023 through where we are today. We started last fiscal year at just about $2.1 million, so $2,092,000. So far this year, our total revenue has been about $651,000, and total expenditures have been around $877,000. And as we've talked about before, based on some of those fee decreases that the board did a couple of years ago, or now back about 4 years ago, there was an effort to operate at a deficit. And so the board will be bringing in less money in revenue compared to expenditures until the fee fund balance does go down. I do want to make you all aware, I expect that the revenue will come up just a little bit before the end of the year. Part of that has to do with licensed psychologists, license renewals. They renew differently than the other licenses. Every June of even numbered years is when we see our licensed psychologists renew. So there's only about 1,000 of the licensed psychologists in Kansas compared. Overall, we have about 15,500 permanent licensees. So it's not the largest group, but it will kind of show an increase in our revenue probably in May and June before the end of the fiscal year. But I do expect that our ending balance will show that trends that we've been talking about, that it will be going down. But in the next board meeting in July, I should have end of the year fiscal numbers so we can have a conversation about possible other fee decreases like the board had talked about during the budget process before the legislature this year. So I just wanted to show you where we're at today, and then I'll give you another update when we talk again at the next board meeting in July. The next item has to do with other operations updates, and I wanted to brag on my staff just for a little bit. My staff is a very conscientious group, and they like to do fundraisers for different local groups here in the city of Topeka. Recently, they collected money to donate to Harvesters to help with the food bank for individuals. And so we were able to go over to Harvesters, provide that donation, and they were able to take a tour and just kind of learn about some of the role that Harvesters plays at Kansas, helping connect people to necessary food and different things that they need. And so that was really valuable. So I just kind of wanted to share that about them and their efforts and highlight that. Happy to recognize them for that. Another item we've been working on for the last several months has been converting our current website to a new website. And I'm happy to announce that Tuesday of last week, we officially launched our new website. If you've seen the website, you'll notice it looks quite a bit different. We really tried to make sure that we kept a lot of the same functionality. We didn't want to confuse people, but this is basically in large part in an effort to make it more accessible for people with mobile devices and to streamline the information so people can find what they need to get to more quickly. And so we now have a partnership with Granicus. They were able to redesign our website. We're working on making sure that all of any issues that are remaining are taken care of and cleaned up. But we'll probably share more information with you as board members in terms of some of your uses of the website here coming up. But just wanted you to know that in general, there were very few issues with the rollover. And we've gotten some positive comments back from people before and after we made the change. And thankfully, the website did not change. I was concerned about that we would have people perhaps going to the wrong location, but there's about a half an hour where www was added in front of the website, and now either will go to our website whether you add that or not. So small technical issues, but it's been resolved, and I think our website looks pretty good now. But if you have any comments or any feedback, feel free to send them to Leslie or myself, and we'll talk with the representatives from OITS to make sure we can resolve those issues. And then the last item in terms of our operations, I'm happy to announce that we have finalized an agreement with CE Broker. So the board has been talking with a company called CE Broker as a way to streamline more of our audit process and to help licensees, instead of having to keep track of all of their records, this would provide them with an ability to get a free license with CE Broker and upload their documentation on their continuing education hours. And so when that happens, if they are pulled for audit, instead of them having to send it back and forth to the BSRB to have us check all that, we can now go into the portal, verify they have all their hours, and then say that their audit has been approved. So it should make that process much quicker on our end, and then should be a helpful service for licensees too. So the launch of that probably will be within the next 2 months. We've gone ahead and taken care of a lot of the technical issues in terms of data sharing agreements, the master service agreement. The next thing will be, now that we have our new website and it's looking like everything is pretty good with that, we'll be adding an announcement to the website and then trying to link up our license portal so that it can verify through CE Broker if people have all of their hours documented through CE Broker, if they've agreed to pursue that. So CE Broker should be launched sometime in the next couple months, and we'll be sending out an announcement as we get closer to that date too.
And I'm sorry,
Mhm.
how will that be launched to the licensee?
Yeah, so the way that will work is we will send out an announcement and we will say, here, we'll also post it on the website, and we'll say, we are now partnering with CE Broker. If you would like to sign up for this, it's an optional service, but basically what you would do is you would sign up through CE Broker for an account. It would be free, and you would be able to basically upload your documentation of your continuing education hours, and then you could even assign them in certain areas. So you could assign them to say, these are the 3 hours in ethics, or these are the 6 hours in diagnosis and treatment, or these are the general hours. And if you, there's also some resources through CE Broker where they promote some other continuing education resources. They have some upper tiers where they can work more one-on-one with people, and those are completely voluntary if people want to sign up for those advanced services. So that's how they make money on their end, is people choosing to do above the free service. But from our end, it was very important that we made sure that people had a choice in this. If they didn't want to do it, they didn't have to, but we thought it'd be a good resource for them. So it's completely voluntary, but if they want to do that, that's how they would sign up for the free service.
Thank you.
Any other questions on those operations topics that I talked about? Okay, well, let's move next to upper legislative updates. Just wanted to talk about one quick update. Last time we talked as a board meeting, I provided information on sort of a strange proviso that had been added during the appropriations process concerning the BSRB, and it would have prevented us from enforcing some of our requirements for social work applicants in terms of an in-residence requirement. There was some confusion about that. Following the board meeting, I was able to have some really positive conversations with some members of the legislature. I believe that there was some confusion about that. And so when the appropriations bill went to the floor, there was a motion to remove that proviso language. So it didn't go any further than the House floor. And it wasn't on issue the rest of the appropriations process. So no need to worry about that item. Just kind of wanted to put a bow on that. But we did have some good conversations behind the scenes with members of the legislature, just clarifying everything and making sure they had a good understanding of the changes the board has been making in terms of opening things up. I think there was some confusion that some individuals looked at the regulations going through and thought that we were making things more strict in terms of in-person attendance for attending some of those classes, but it was actually the opposite. We were taking the existing regulations and trying to open them up so that individuals had more of a choice, either attending in person or by screen in synchronous video conferencing. So once we kind of explained that process, and we explained too that it would not affect individuals that came from an accredited school for individuals who are at a school that's in candidacy for accreditation. It really involves a small group of people that come from those social work schools that are just not accredited at all. And so once we were able to walk through that, I think there was a lot more understanding, and that proviso was removed. In terms of some other legislative updates, we're happy to announce that the Social Work Compact Bill, House Bill 2484, did pass. That passed the House first and then the Senate, and then it has been signed into law now by the governor. The next step will be, so basically the way that compact worked is there needed to be 7 states that passed the model legislation. And then once that happened, the commission will be able to start meeting to flesh out the rules and everything else. And so now that 7 states have passed it, we were at number 7. That's right. And there have been a few others that have passed it since that point. Sometime this fall, they will start reaching out to states to have a commissioner appointed and then represent each of those states at a meeting where they start determining, how to implement the compact. So don't have a time frame on when it will be implemented, but that will be coming up here sometime this fall. I can't give you a date of when it will actually go live, but based on the other compacts, it could take a little bit of time just to make sure that everything is in place and they have a good system to track who all is providing services under the compact. I did want to let you know, last time I talked to you about the bill, it was still in the process of going through the House and the Senate. They had made some changes on the House side, which were problematic. The original version of the bill would have allowed the BSRB authority to set the different amounts of fees for people practicing under what we have right now, a single state license or a multi-state license. And that was changed in committee to instead have a system where we would have our existing in-state licenses, but if you wanted to practice under a multi-state license, it would essentially be for an amount not to exceed $25 on top of the existing fees. And what we had said originally was we wanted to poll social workers to see what the level of interest would be from social workers moving from a single state license to a multi-state license. Because once we knew the level of interest, we would be able to calculate if all those people did switch over, what amount would be necessary for us to make sure we weren't losing money from losing all of the license revenue for people that live out of state that would choose under the compact to practice in their own state under a multi-state license. So we did a large survey to all social workers that was put out in February, and we collected information back on that. There's a 62-page report posted on our website. We have 3 levels of licensure that would be eligible for the compact in Kansas, the bachelor's, master's, and clinical level. And we asked the social workers what the percentage would be as far as the interest in switching over from the traditional single state license to the multi-state license. Using those numbers, we removed the individuals who have a license that live out of state and then applied the percentages to the in-state groups of licensees in terms of what amount would be necessary. If all the people who said they'd be interested in moving actually did, and you look at those percentages and apply them over, it's kind of very formulaic. Essentially what it would amount to is $100,000. And so right now our out-of-state licensees contribute $150,000. So basically at a $25 price point, you would be $50,000 short every 2 years for the license cycle. So to balance out, $35 would be a lot closer to a break-even point. And so what I did is I talked to members of the legislature and I said, the original setup would have provided the BSRB authority to actually look to see what the amount should be. And I tried to see if there was interest in moving back to the original setup. But unfortunately, the members of the legislature behind the scenes were not interested in doing that. And I said, okay, well, my numbers show that if we had the numbers that said they would want to move over, $25 would be insufficient. We would still be operating at a loss of $50,000 every 2 years. Is there any interest in us at least reaching that balance point of $35? And there was interest in that behind the scenes. And so that is what I proposed to the Senate committee as an amendment. And I requested they put that forward. And the vice chair of the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee was willing to make that an amendment and open it up for discussion. That committee did have a discussion on that point as far as setting it at $35. Ultimately, it came down to a 4-4 vote, and the motion failed. So unfortunately, it stuck with the $25 amount. During that process, there was some information that was put out in the committee that wasn't accurate in terms of how many licensees we oversee. Some other information about the BSRB was put out there publicly that was not accurate either. So I did my best when I had the opportunity to talk to the committee in terms of laying out what the facts support. But unfortunately, we were not able to get that cleaned up. The members of the legislature did say if we are experiencing revenue loss in the future, to come back before them and they would try to help us out. So we will see how that goes. We may not see this impact for a few years if the compact does not become operational right away. But I kind of wanted to let you all know what steps I made, why I made them, and we were close. This still would have had to, it would have been an item of difference between the House and the Senate. And if the Senate would have passed the version that I was trying to help us get put in, it still would have gone to conference committee, most likely as an item of difference. And who knows with conference committee how that would have turned out. But that is why I was seeking the $35 amount on behalf of the board. And the last time I talked to you, I said I would try to do efforts to make sure that we had this in the best position we could to make sure we weren't operating at a loss. But unfortunately, we were not able to get that done. So I would try to clarify all that all for you, and we'll keep an eye on it and then see how things go.
The alternative, we'll have to raise the basic licensing fee.
Yeah, I think, there was information put out that at a $25 price point, it would raise $140,000. I don't see how that could really be possible. For that amount to actually occur, it would almost be everyone who was eligible for it to switch over. And the only compact that has had a model like this is the nursing compact. They have a multi-state license. The rest have had other variations, but the only one is used a multi-state license is nursing. And within the first 4 years of implementation, only about 20% of their licensees moved over to that model. It's not apples to apples exactly because it's mental health versus nursing care, but that's the only one we can really compare to in terms of a model. And otherwise, we could use the input people provided us on the survey that said, here's the percentages. But for that $140,000 total that was set in committee, for that to happen, it would almost take every social worker just about who was eligible to move that direction. And I think that's not very likely. So, but yes, with the $25 cap, if it is implemented at that amount, and that is the amount that we can charge, if we do continue to operate at a loss, the thing that the board would have to look at is potentially raising the underlying fees for all licensees rather than the group that would be these people practicing with a multi-state license, because the multi-state license amount would be locked into $25. The others, we are under the cap for many of those types of renewal fees, for example. So that's something we'll have to kind of take a look at in the future. The next bill I want to make you aware of was House Bill 2745, and that is a bill that passed exempting military spouses of active military service members from occupational licensing. So right now, there is a way for military members, when they are on active duty, they do not have to renew their license if they are on active service. They can let us know that, and we can basically hold their license in that military status. What this bill would do is it would take things further. So military spouses for any active duty military members, they would not have to pay, the application fee. They would not have to pay the original license fee. They wouldn't have to pay the license renewal fee as long as their spouse was in active service. So we know based on the last few years how many reciprocity applicants we have had that have military, how many military reciprocity and how many military spouse applicants we've had. And so we provided an initial estimate to the legislature based on some of those totals in the most recent years, but we really don't keep track of active duty military spouses from individuals who were, licensed several years ago. So we will have to make an effort to really try to get a hold of this number. And then we'll have to kind of quantify that. And I'll try to bring back those numbers, but we'll try to make sure that we are putting information out there about this new bill. It does not go into effect until July 1st. So we do have a little bit of time to figure out the best approach to it, but I wanted to put it on your radar. And in a big picture sense, this does mean there will be another factor in terms of our revenues decreasing. Not the largest factor, but it is one more item in terms of a current revenue source from those active duty military spouses that will at least be going away while their spouse is in active military service.
Can I ask a question?
Mhm.
So many military people do not request to be put on military status because they've been told they have to renew and do the same things everyone else does, like show us their CEUs, and military doesn't have to do that. So will their fees be waived for military as well if they aren't in military status?
That's a good question.
I'll read it later.
Okay.
It's okay. I didn't know if you would know that off the top of your head.
So, you know, the language is very small in the bill. So the bill itself was House Bill 2745. And it really just amended a couple sections of an existing statute.
Okay,
And one basically said, an application by a military spouse of an active military service member shall be considered a complete application without submission of fees, pursuant to the section that talks about
Okay.
what you need for complete application. And then the other one says, notwithstanding any other provision of law, the contrary, applicants who are military spouses of active military service members shall be exempt from all fees assessed by any licensing body to obtain an occupational license in Kansas and renew such credential. And then it includes the different types of licenses. So since it says they would be exempt, I think we would at least need to make them aware of it and then say, you know, you are exempt of it, but of course, they don't let us know that they fall into that category. It would be hard for us to really give them that
right,
benefit.
thank you.
And Tim, did you have any other thoughts on that one? I know you and I have talked briefly about this bill, but
Yeah, that was my recollection, was it was specific to military spouses, not,
Not
you
military,
know, active duty or any other.
Yeah.
it just seemed odd, so.
Yeah, and it could be a product of, you know, the federal law, which is approximately a year and a half old now. That creates a, you know, a different designation, and so maybe that was the thinking, I don't know.
Okay.
It's interesting.
well, just wanted to highlight those two bills for you. We're working on implementing both of those. The next update in terms of legislative updates, the regulations. In your packet, there's a large group of regulations that are ready for you to do a roll call vote on later, and I'll talk about that when we get to that item on the agenda. But just want to let you know we're continuing to move those forward, and there'll be quite a few items for you to take a look at here coming up. In terms of the association updates, just want to let you know I was able to attend a couple of mid-year meetings. One, the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards. And I attended that mid-year meeting just a few weeks back. And David Stevens was able to attend that meeting with me as well. So a lot of good conversations at that meeting, some increasing conversations about technology. Artificial intelligence is definitely going to be an item for the board to have increased conversations about how we get a handle on that. And talking with some of the other administrators there, the topic of supervision is also a popular item. People are trying to reach some sort of consensus about best practices and the right approach to supervision. And so that's another item there. David, did you have any items you wanted to talk about from that conference?
No, it looks like, you know, it just is always impressive to see how we're at it. Seems like we've dealt with a lot of the issues that are frustrating years. Like having a master's, you know, already and stuff like that.
Yeah, and one of the other items that people are wrestling with is whether to license master's level psychology, and if so, how best to approach it. And I think the system we have in Kansas has worked well for a number of years. It can always be improved, you know, things can always be looked at, but there are some states that have really taken a hardline approach and are now trying to take their first step into that area. And it's really, seems like it's very much a struggle. So it's been interesting to kind of compare notes with them. The other conference, just to let you know too, I'm able to start serving on some of the association committees. And so for that association, I serve on the research committee. Between now and the last meeting that we had, I really haven't had any big tasks to serve on there, but they are trying to formalize a way that people can request data and information from that psychology association. So I was asked to kind of review a couple of the proposed forms they had, and so happy to give back some time with that. The other association I wanted to comment on was the Association of Social Work Boards, ASWB. They had a mid-year meeting that just happened about a week and a half ago. I was able to attend that with Andrea Perdomo Morales, and there were some really good conversations there. I was able to be a presenter on the topic of supervision at that conference, part of a panel with two other individuals, one who was a board member from North Carolina, and the other who was an administrator like myself from Arizona. And so we shared information about what resources ASWB is providing to states in terms of how many states have a contract that you have to sign in advance, and what is all required and what counts in terms of supervision hours, and different ways to track supervision as you go. So I think right now we're all trying to come to at least, I don't know if we're all going to come to the same consensus on all the requirements, but at least we're going to have a better understanding and it'll be helpful for licensees when they go from state to state, if there are differences in what counts for supervision, what doesn't. So, Andrea, did you have any comments you wanted to share from that conference?
I just wanted to say that David did a nice job representing our state there in his presentation and shared about the social workers doing surveys and how we have done a couple of those. And there were a lot of questions from others on that and what had come out of that. So I think we will probably see more states starting to do those surveys based on your leadership under that. David did mention the AI. I think that is something that is going to come up more and more for this board. So just to be on the lookout for that.
Thank you. And yeah, you're right. Our surveys were very popular. People have opinions one way or the other. But when you can actually kind of say, we reached out to our social workers in the state, and we got information on these different topics, and we have information from a survey in 2001 or 2021 and a survey from right now, and we can do those periodically. It's interesting to kind of track those things over time. And our survey had asked about kind of the movement of in-person supervision to telesupervision, and the teleservices area is still really popular right now too. So,
David, in all of these, and I think you'll probably say it again in another these report outs, but the topic of AI, and I'm wondering at what point we formalize and put some meat on that on our agenda. I know I had a colleague who sent me a consent form that she'd received from a therapist. That was a consent for AI therapy note taker. And I said, well, what are you going to do? And she said, well, I'm not going to sign it. But I think it's here and it's now. And so the more, the more we can inform our licensees or even gather some of these opinions. I think there's a work group maybe with the social work board that you might be involved with or something. I've seen some things on a listserv, but I think the topic is very present. And I think our licensees would appreciate some guidance on.
Yeah, there's a team being formed right now, at least for the professional counseling profession. Yeah, and it's definitely gonna continue to grow. So it's a good one for us to look at. Yeah. I am serving on a committee for ASWB this year too. I am just starting to serve on their finance committee. So I'm just starting to dig in and get a better understanding. And I think serving on those committees for the associations is helpful. Volunteer service is kind of one of the ways those associations continue to run. And the more that we serve on those types of groups, the better our voice will be respected, I think, when we put positions forward and we ask for changes and things. So happy to take a step forward with that. And then wanted to just add a note here. ASWB is currently doing something called a census, social work census of all social workers. This is the first time they've done it as a census. Part of this is that when the license examinations are updated periodically, they do sort of a look to see what practices are out and being taken in the workplace right now for the different professions. And then this was sort of a bigger approach ASWB wanted to do when they were looking at redesigning their examination. Was looking at workforce, but also trying to look at who the social workers are for individuals that work in the social work area. So this is for licensees, but also for individuals who were formerly social workers that are now retired, individuals who work in education for social work, students. And so they're just trying to get an idea of the different practices out there and the different groups that are providing these services. And so we added a note to our website to encourage people to go ahead and do the census and to complete that. And so hopefully people will be doing that. It's good information to provide back.
And can you skip to the CEU component?
Yes. So one of the items that was a little confusing, and then ASWB provided the notice. They basically said that there would be continuing education hours approved for completing this survey, this census. Unfortunately, that's really more of a matter of state by state. We determine in every state what qualifies. And in Kansas, we have a regulation that kind of outlines what qualifies and what doesn't. And unfortunately, the census doesn't really fit under an existing category in terms of how someone could accrue hours. And just kind of as an example, there are some states that have very broad umbrella for continuing education and allow things like public service. Like during an election, if somebody works at an election poll for a certain number of hours, some other states would say, okay, we'll give you some CE hours for that service, but there's really not an educational component to that exactly. So for Kansas, it's not really outlined in one of our existing categories that we can count. So we understand there will probably be some confusion about that. So when individuals go to renew their hours, if this is an area where there was confusion, we're going to be understanding with them and try to make sure that they have other ways to get their hours for them.
Dave, was there further discussion at ASWB about the national sand? Where they're at with that?
That there was, so there will probably be some new information coming out this year. About a year and a half ago, they released demographic data that showed pass rates and it showed disparities in passage rate between different groups. And then this year, they are collecting that data, but they're putting together more of a robust report that talks about some of the other factors involved with why there may be some disparities in different groups. And they've also implemented some changes to the examination. One of these was moving from a 4-part multiple choice to a 3-part multiple choice. They found that for some individuals, it could become a speed reading type test. Because even though some individuals may not struggle with that at all, having to read that 4th option, and they found too that in most cases, nobody is actually picking that last option. Really, there's 3 options that most people are trying to decide between. And so dropping that really didn't harm the ability of people to know the information, but it did let them have enough time to really get through all the information on the test. They partnered with a group called Fifth Theory, I believe, that if someone fails the test, they follow up with that applicant to provide supportive services in terms of how they can prepare for the test better the next time they take it. They have a new vendor for test, PSI. They moved away from the company called Pearson VUE, and they are looking at in terms of setting up a scholarship for people who have taken the examination and have been unsuccessful on it. They don't have a lot of details for that yet, but that's something that'll be coming up. And then they've taken some other approaches to reevaluating how the questions are being written and things like that too. So they didn't really have any big updates in terms of new items, but some of those are kind of being phased in. And I've been asking them about the change from the 4 to the 3 for a little while. The problem is those questions have to get phased in because you need to make sure that they're going to be valid test questions. But ultimately, they want to get to the point to where all of them are going to be 3 versus 4. And then I guess there was a couple other items. Test anxiety is something they were trying to look at as well. So they've been trying to open up more restrictions that really don't go towards someone's knowledge on the test. So if someone had low blood sugar, being able to take a snack, someone being able to take more breaks. They also wanted to work with PSI because PSI said maybe by the end of this year, they would enable a system where people could take the examination from their home instead of having to go to a testing center. And so they're kind of trying to take more of a look at a lot of different factors all at once to see, a lot of the attention was put on the test itself, but that there's a lot of factors that go into that. And so I've been encouraged at the way that they're having open dialogue about this and some of the changes they've made. Hopefully they'll have more data later this year.
I think they also provided some study materials that
They did.
the schools can use to help prepare students.
You're right. That was something else that they did. It used to be that they would sell the material, I think. Now they've made a lot more of that available for free. So.
That was my question around those supportive services. If someone fails, are those costs to people? Okay, so they're provided.
Yeah, not the Fifth Theory and all of it.
I have noticed that one other profession has the online proctoring, so people can take it from home, and it does seem to help. I've seen a lot of people who struggled and then they took it online at home and they passed, so I think it'll help.
You just have to kick everybody else out of your house.
Yeah.
Yeah, it may not be the best approach for everybody.
Yeah.
For people, and I really am encouraged at the creative outside the box approach they're taking and really trying to listen to like a larger conversation and really examine a lot of different things. So. The next item, an update, the Association of Marriage and Family Therapy Regulatory Boards. I served as a member of their elections committee. I was appointed in that position. Not a lot of time goes into that task, but I was asked to review references for applicants for a slate for their board members coming up. So I was able to do that a little bit. We have 2 really good candidates for the treasurer position for that association, and then 2 for a member at large position. So happy to do that. And then the American Association of State Counseling Boards, AASCB. I wanted to share with all of you that they have decided they would like to appoint me as a board member for that association to serve as treasurer. They meet once a month just for about an hour to an hour and a half at the virtual meeting. It's a group of about 6 or 7 board members. But I did a lot of looking into this when they started this conversation with me. I didn't want to take something that would take too much time away from my responsibilities here in Kansas, but I really did feel like this would be a good opportunity to use some of my skills. Before my time as executive director, I was a principal fiscal analyst for the legislature in the legislative research department. I'm used to looking at agency budgets, and I think I could ask good questions and try to look for ways in which groups can be efficient and effective with how they're spending money. So just want to let you know about that. That will happen as of July 1st. I've started attending some of their meetings as sort of an onboarding type thing, but I think that will be another helpful thing in terms of giving us a voice in another association at a high level. So
Congratulations on all of that. That's
thank you. Very exciting. So I will be taking over someone's existing role. They are stepping down, so I'll be serving in that capacity for the next year. And then in the spring, there will be the opportunity to run for that position again if I choose to do so. So we'll see how this goes for the last 6 months of the calendar year. And then if I choose to do it again, I'll let you guys know in January. And then I'm also a co-facilitator of monthly discussion meetings. These are ways in which board members and administrators from different states can kind of compare notes and learn good practices from each other. So I've been a facilitator of that, but I think that may change once I become a board member. And then in terms of other updates, I'll just let you know in my report, I listed a few more different things in terms of ongoing day-to-day type operations. And Jason Hess did provide a report in the packet in terms of updates from recent Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Boards. You're welcome to read his report as well. And with that, I'll go ahead and end my report for the board.
Thank you, Dave. Are there any questions or comments for David?
I think it's great you're on one of the committee and all 4 of those organizations. Sure.
Yeah, I do too. I think it'll just deepen the knowledge and the resources that you can bring back to our state. So I think it's great to get involved in each of those groups. Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to staff reports.
I don't have anything. My stuff's covered in the meeting.
Yeah, and just kind of what our routine comment is, we normally highlight our historic number of licensees, and that does continue to grow. Last meeting we had in March was 15,570, and we're up another 75 or so to 15,648. So we're just continuing to fund.
And we're just getting ready.
Oh, it's the
Everyone's
time.
graduating. Yeah. We're starting to receive transcripts.
Okay, excellent. We'll move to the complaint review committee. Cindy?
One of the documents you have and the CRC information is the number of complaints we receive each month and their status. I'd like to point out that the last 3 months we have received it appears that we have received a larger number of complaints than usual. Although it's always hard to predict trends, I believe this is actually closer than what we would appear to receive, and that it's what we expected.
So you're saying receiving 22 complaints in April is
The last 3 months is actually not an outlier. It's actually what we expected.
okay. So like the last quarter 2023 was probably a lower expectation of reports.
Yes, that this is probably what we should have been getting.
Okay. Any other questions or comments for Cindy? Just giving a little bit of time here to look over the trend data. If there's any questions on that. Okay, then we will move on to the professions reports. Thank you. We'll start with licensed psychology.
So we met on April 9th at 6 p.m. And in that discussion, we concluded our conversation regarding the regulation changes for the documentation of continuing education credits. We also began a discussion on educational requirements for non-accredited institutions. And we had a discussion, or we kicked off a discussion regarding putting out a survey for psychologists. We reviewed a bit of what the social workers had done for their survey. And we will meet again June 11th at 6 p.m.
Thank you for that, Richard. Social work.
Yes, the social work committee, advisory committee met on Tuesday, April 9th as well. We continued to review the results of our survey, and out of that review, we did decide to recommend that we lower the number of required CEs from 40 to 30 per the results of our survey, and social workers generally agreeing that it would not reduce the quality of social work practice. We agreed to ask David to send out a request for new members, as we have several members that are finishing their service. We began a discussion about a jurisprudence exam as a possible alternative or addition to the current licensure exam. And we formed a subcommittee to work on updating the social work supervision manual. So we'll be meeting in the next month or so and bring some recommendations back to the full committee. And we will meet again on June 18th.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Professional counseling.
Good morning. The Professional Counseling Advisory Committee met on April 1st. We discussed the compact rollout, which will happen at the end of the year. We discussed the jurisprudence exam ideas that David Fye presented. He had a creative solution to CEs for jurisprudence, and we were very enthusiastic about the way he suggested that we do it. We talked about possible changes in the in-residence definition in our statutes. We discussed the questionnaire that we plan to put out as inspired by the social workers. We talked about supervision training. We had a robust discussion about that. And David produced some data that was really enlightening and really helped us to figure out what our ideas would be about the continuation of supervision training in the state. And lastly, we had a request. We encouraged David to go out and have put out a request for new members, as we have a few people rolling off. And our next meeting will be June 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Master's level psychology.
Yeah, we met on April 3rd. One of our big discussions was around when LCPs can take the EPPP. Currently, they have to complete 3,000 hours of supervised work, but some of them have indicated the farther they get away from their education, the harder that test is to take, and they would like the flexibility, if they want to be able to take it earlier, and the advisory committee supports that idea. We've continued a review of educational requirements, and that's an ongoing part of what we're doing. We too discussed the jurisprudence exam and support the proposal that Dave brought to our group. We're looking at developing a possible survey for educators around curriculum and subject area material. And we're just kind of in the early stages of doing that. We too have a member who's not going to ask to be reappointed, so we will be looking at one person. And our next meeting is June 5th.
Okay, thank you very much. Marriage and family therapy met on April 12th. Similarly, we covered some of the same topics around educational equivalency standards. Also talked about and looked at some preliminary questions around potential survey of our licensees. So that work will continue at the next meeting. We also have some terming advisory committee members, and so we'll be looking at adding a couple. Our goal is to add 2 each year to make sure that we're cycling people appropriately. Our group also appreciated David's solution to the jurisprudence examination. And we do have some folks who are in educational places, and we're really interested in what that exam would look like to help prep students too for ensuring their ethics are met along those lines, and then talked a little bit about discussion topics moving forward. Our next meeting is June 14th. Addiction counseling next.
I'll go ahead and take care of this one for Jill. She couldn't be in attendance today, but the Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee did meet at the end of March. And some of the discussions were similar to the other advisory committees. There was discussion about a possible survey. There was conversation about jurisprudence. And one of the topics that they will be looking at for a future meeting coming up is last year there was sort of the proposal about I guess it was 2 years ago now, the student licensed temporary addiction counseling. And that initially there were two proposals, one for sort of the bachelor's level for students who are along the path to become a bachelor's level addiction counseling student. And I think there have been some comments the committee has received to see if there's any interest in reevaluating potentially a proposal for students who are part of a master's type program. And what that could look like. And so I think that's something the advisory committee will have some more discussions on sometime coming up. Their next meeting is going to be in June 2024.
Thanks for that, Dave. In the behavior analysis group.
Yeah, we met on April 1st, April Fool's Day, which is appropriate for us. We spent a lot of time talking about continuing education and really the gender affirming care and the legislation that surrounds that. We were able to clear a lot of our docket from some of the same topics that other subcommittees have been working on. Probably the big thing is the advocacy that a survey would provide to be able to get information from our constituents about representation on the board as a whole. And so we are also in the process of adding new committee members so that we don't have everybody roll out at the same time. Our next meeting is scheduled for June 14th. And that's it.
Thank you, Linda.
You're welcome.
Okay, on our agenda is a 10-minute break. Do you want to go ahead and take that now, or do you want to try to get through other agenda items? So everyone feel ready to break? Okay. I will not move the agenda item. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break and then we'll be back. I think that'll be then around 11:12.
For those of you on Zoom, I'll go ahead and put you in the waiting room.
It's what you- oh, really? It's too close.
Okay, Laura and Richard, can you hear us okay? Okay, I
Yes.
think we should be good.
Okay, thank you very much. Back from break, we'll resume our agenda. The next item will go back to the old business, which is proposed regulations. That is a relatively significant packet for us to go through today, so hand that over to you, Dave.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and reference two documents. One of them is very large. It is a copy of all the regulations that are ready for you to review, and officially, as part of this regulation process, the advisory committees generally recommend changes to the board, or the board can make recommended changes to the regulations. When that happens, our staff, usually Leslie, will do the editing to the actual language, and those have to be reviewed and approved by the Department of Administration and the Attorney General's office. And if there's any disagreement or they don't approve, it gets sent back to us for further editing. And so once those get all the way through that process, then we can publish those in the Kansas Register. When that happens, they're open for 60 days for a period of public comment. During that time, usually there's a legislative committee, the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules and Regulations, who has a representative from the BSRB come before them and explain the proposed changes, and then they can ask questions or make requests. That committee does not have the authority to modify what the agency recommends, but they can ask questions or recommend changes as part of that process. And then at the end of the 60 days, by statute, there is a required public meeting, which we held here at the BSRB office for these regulations, where members of the public could have come to provide additional comments or questions or make requests. When we had that public meeting, no one from the public attended, but we did have that according to the language. And so basically that's where we're at today. And so we've gone through each of the different phases. The last step is when the regulations are ready, the board needs to do a roll call vote to formally adopt the proposed changes to the regulations. Once the board does that, they can be published in the Kansas Register as if, you know, the official language that would be reflected if these were all adopted. And then about 15 days after publication, they become final. So we've made it lots of steps along the way, but we're very close. The language you have here is very similar to the language that you reviewed and approved earlier this year before we put it out for public comment. But there was, I mentioned I had two documents for you. The one was the list of all of the proposed changes to the regulations. The second is a document that has a header with big letters KLRD for Kansas Legislative Research Department. So I mentioned one of the steps in the process is for the BSRB or agencies that have proposed changes to regulations to go in front of that Joint Committee on Administrative Rules and Regulations. They ask us questions, they make recommendations. As the board, you don't have to adopt their proposed changes, but I do think it's a good idea for you to be aware of the comments that they make and questions they ask. So I provided their report to you. On page 2, I thought I would go ahead and highlight the comments they made for these regulations concerning the BSRB. So on page 2 of that document from KLRD, it listed the different regulations that would be amended. And then it said the committee requests the agency define biopsychosocial and synchronous video conferencing for purposes of rules and regulations and ensure terms are used uniformly within its rules and regulations. And so just to kind of clarify that, let's look first on the term synchronous video conferencing. And yes.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah. On your big packet of regulations, I went ahead, since there were so many, I put them together as one document. But on the front page, you can see the different regulations and which professions they affect. And there are 4 that include potential highlighted post-hearing changes. And so to frame what I'll kind of walk you through, you could just go ahead and do a roll call vote to adopt the proposed changes to regulations that you had already put forward. That is within your authority to do so. But given some of the comments from the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules and Regulations, Leslie and I talked We thought there might be some helpful language that could be added to address their concerns. So specifically about those two comments, the biopsychosocial and the synchronous video conferencing. On page 2 of the large packet, one of the items that you all looked at before was the term in residence. And those students that basically are coming from non-accredited schools. And the language for the professions essentially says, if someone received their education from a program that is accredited by a national accrediting body recognized by the board, we can move into the process pretty easily. However, in an effort to be fair, if they attended a program that is not accredited by a national accrediting body approved by the board, we can still look at their qualifications to see if they're substantially equivalent by meeting these alternative requirements in the regulations. And one of those requirements for the professions essentially talked about having a certain amount of coursework, quote unquote, in residence. And the current definition of in residence means the student is present at the physical location of the institution for the purpose of completing coursework during which the student and one or more core faculty members are in face-to-face contact. So that's the current definition. The proposed change to that definition was to eliminate the language that required it to be at the physical location and to allow that in residence requirement to be met by the person being in face-to-face contact with core faculty, either in person or by synchronous video conferencing. And so that's where the reference to synchronous came up. And so as a way to address their concerns about a definition of synchronous, we wanted to bring to you today was just recommending adding the term real time. And that's a very basic definition of synchronous. That's what was intended. And so we thought if instead of adding a new definition section and adding that as a term, let's just go ahead and add that text next to it so that people know when we're saying synchronous, we're meaning real time for the video conferencing. And so that recommended change is included in the regulation for social work, the KAR 102-2-6, exactly as you see it there, or also the professional counseling regulation 102-3-3A, also the marriage and family therapy regulation, the 102-5-3, and the addiction counseling 102-7-3. So for synchronous, it's exactly the same. If you were to go to any of those sections, you would see it just like that.
Does it change the in residence for all of those, or just the ones you mentioned?
Just those 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yours isn't included.
I know we had that issue around testing.
Right.
That kind of tripped us up. Okay.
Yeah, so the in-residence definition for licensed psychology and master's level psychology is not changing. And I don't think that appears in the behavior analyst regulations. So really, this was a proposed change put forward by the other 4 professions.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah. And then the second one, the term biopsychosocial. So if you can turn to this regulation that starts on page 46, I went ahead and numbered them at the very bottom of the pages. But page 46 starts the KAR 102-7-3.
The change was on 49.
Yeah, the specific changes was highlighted on page 49. And this is for the addiction counseling profession. But basically, what this section talks about is for students who have not attended. So kind of to preface this, historically, the addiction counseling profession did not have a national accredited body recognized by the board. One of the changes that the board has put forward is to recognize a national accrediting body. So this language in this regulation says we are now starting to recognize a national accrediting body, but we are still going to be evaluating applicants who attended a program that is not accredited even by this new national accrediting body recognized by the board. So what this language lists here is that if someone attended a program that is not accredited by the national accrediting body, their program would need to meet certain program level requirements, and they would have to get certain coursework level requirements. And in this section C, it does talk about the requirements for certain courses. And so on page 49, section C2, there was some language that discussed a class that was described as methods of individual counseling, which shall include the study of culturally informed, ethical, evidence-based models and approaches to individual counseling, methods for establishing effective therapeutic relationships, developing realistic and achievable treatment goals, and assessing client substance use, functioning, motivation, and progress, and strategies for crisis prevention and intervention. the change the board had recommended moving forward was striking the term substance use and replacing that with biopsychosocial. And what the addiction counseling profession, the advisory committee had originally recommended in terms of that change. So Leslie Allen might be able to talk about this a little bit more based on all the applications that she's received. But essentially, addiction counseling is not as standardized in terms of what is required state to state. And so the coursework and how these courses are identified is not uniform based on what Kansas requires based on a lot of other states. And so the advisory committee recommended this change as one of several changes in an effort to have more maybe uniform language that would allow people that came from other courses or other pathways to be able to become licensed as an addiction counselor in Kansas if they had courses that maybe didn't have that specific title. Do you want to comment a little bit about that?
Oh, no, I think you covered it well.
Okay.
It was to allow other professions' language to be included and not be so specific.
And that term biopsychosocial, when we went in front of the JCAR committee, the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules and Regulations, were not familiar with that term, biopsychosocial. And so I deferred to Leslie, and Leslie mentioned that she has seen that term. We used other professions, but essentially the most basic definition of it is it's just a combination. So what it really means is the biological, psychological, and social needs. And so basically, we recommend adding some additional language here to clarify that biopsychosocial, when we use it in this context, really just means the biological, psychological, or social needs.
They were unhappy to move on the word substance use. Is there a reason we couldn't put substance use and or biopsychosocial? So that it,
I don't know
It's
if you
kind of
can
one's
do
under the
and
other.
or. I mean, my understanding was the psychological includes addictions, it includes substance use, so. I don't know that you can do and or, and if the. Syllabi or course description did not specifically say substance use.
you can't say and or like. But that's not descriptive enough.
It's this legislative style. They don't like you to use and ors in the style, so it'll be crossed back and sent back to us, unfortunately. But that does go to a different point. So that explains kind of why we recommended that language here to kind of spell out the definition of biopsychosocial. On the KLRD page, if you flip to page 3, there was another comment they had, and it says on this regulation specifically, the committee asks why the term substance use was removed from paragraph C2 and replaced with biopsychosocial needs. And the committee expresses its concern that the modification of this educational requirement may result in students completing less coursework specific to addiction and substance use. And I guess what I would say with this is Leslie and I have taken a look at the rest of the regulation, and as I mentioned before, there's not the same standardization in terms of courses from one state to another. We would not want to remove so many references to substance use or substance abuse that there wouldn't be sufficient training in that. But we looked at the rest of the regulation, and there are several more references to courses in those specific substance use and substance abuse areas. There's the addiction pharmacology. There is
Co-occurring.
yeah, you want to comment on some of those?
Well, I mean, introduction to addiction.
Number 6 is addiction services coordination.
Yeah, I mean, this is really one specific item of the entire language,
Right.
and it's just with respect to the individual counseling, and so I can see maybe why there was a cause for concern, but also it doesn't seem like it eliminates the educational components around substance use disorders and all, so I think it's in my mind, a fairly good adjustment here.
Yeah, and there's a certain number of hours that I believe individuals need to have in the area of substance use as part of their education.
This whole paragraph 33 is about one class, methods
Right.
of individual counseling.
Yeah.
Any substance abuse assessment should include biological, psychological, social aspects, so.
Yeah.
I think we could answer that it's included in the biopsychosocial. It doesn't reduce how much a student is learning about substance abuse. It's just looking at it through that holistic lens.
Yeah, I understand, the comments and wanted to communicate those back to you. We have been able to get this alternative language reviewed and approved by Department of Administration and the Attorney General's office. So if it does look suitable to you today, you can do a roll call vote on it, and then we could start the process to publish these. I do think there's some interest in doing that. There's some people that we were able to get licensed once the language is official. So we really did try to move fast. And Leslie did have several versions approved. And so Thursday, maybe. So
Yes.
so we really tried to make sure we had this in front of you so you could take care of it today. But if it's not something that you approve of or don't want to vote on, definitely this is your decision. We just kind of wanted to bring that to you as far as explaining the alternative languages for the two definitions in terms of their concern, in terms of removing the word substance use and not having sufficient coursework. Based on our review, there's still several courses you need to take in the area of substance use. It's just really that one. And even kind of what was mentioned today, that it would still involve the same topics that you would have. So, but want to make sure to bring something to you that you were comfortable with approving. So, do you have any questions on that? Like I said before, you do have the ability to approve the original language, but we do want to be responsive when we can to members of the legislature, even if they don't have the authority to block these regulation changes. We definitely listened, so we took to heart what they said. We wanted to bring it to you to give you the option of what you wanted to do. But I think it could be something positive if we say we listened to your concerns, we try to address those. And so,
Would one way to address the substance use concern to add a parenthetical after means, which does include substance use? Because weren't you saying that it's some set of,
That's what I was saying.
and so that way the words are in there. They don't feel like it's hiding involved. Because I wouldn't have known what that's referring to.
But if it is specifically listed that way, then it has to be specifically listed that way in the course description of the syllabus.
If you said including, it would.
If
would
it
be
didn't mention it, yes. I mean, if substance use isn't mentioned, like, I was reviewing a syllabus for psychopharmacology, and they did not talk about how it affects toxicity and things like that, and that's part of what's in here in the reg. And so we have always done, this is just the way I was taught, that whatever is in there needs to be mentioned. It has to be covered in the course. So if it's not a substance use specific course, it may not have that.
Also, my intent, and maybe I need a different word, not including me, and maybe it is just the lawyer in me, but the intent of having a clause like that is not to create an absolute, but to be an example, but not necessarily restricted. Tim, you see what I'm saying? I'm not saying that if you put EG, to me, that doesn't say it must be substance use, must be in there. It says that would be an example of bias psychosocial, of what bias psychosocial needs are. But I'm not trying to get these things out, it's just trying to.
Yeah, I think part of the issue is you're putting a clinical language perspective to people who have no clinical background, and so they don't understand what's included in a comprehensive assessment of needs, and so that's where the rub is. So I think, as happens in a couple of examples here,
And to leave it possible for people who are getting their substance abuse education to take a methods of individual counseling class that doesn't specifically say it's focused
Right.
on substance abuse. That's the reason to leave it out
Right.
of the description. That's what you're saying.
That was the point, yeah.
I mean, if you don't have a title that says individual counseling for substance use disorders.
Right.
You know,
Then it could potentially not count towards the.
as an example, group counseling is usually, it's about methodology, format, engagement, not about the disorder. That makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, my suggestion was intended not
Yeah.
to obstruct, but.
Yeah, I understand here. And if that goes down to an interpretation issue from how we interpret, then I think I would not want to move forward with that. And I understand what David's saying.
So I guess to take the example, because I think it's a good example for discussion, so. You're gonna receive various courses that are gonna be intended to meet this requirement, so how do you interpret and apply that? I mean, if it's a substance use focused course, whatever that may be. Does that check the box of biopsychosocial, and then how does staff know that that's what's intended? What kind of, guidance, I guess, do we have in that area?
Well, the way I look at it, you're looking at this in total. Number one, on page 49 says, I'm going to teach you about addiction. So you have to have a coursework around addiction. Number two says, you have to have a course around individual counseling. Number three says you have a course around group counseling. And so you're looking at it in, yes, in total, but also the individual counseling or the group counseling may not say, we don't have anything in number three about group counseling about substance use disorder. We have it about the process of how do you provide group counseling. So while I'm sensitive to feedback from KLRD, I don't think it's necessary for us to always move in that direction when as clinicians, you would understand that reference point.
The methods of individual counseling are going to be the same.
And I think
In general, regardless of what you're treating.
some of the confusion though might be if you just look up. Biopsychosocial model doesn't mention substance use in there specifically. And so that may be there if they did that and said. This is really broad. How would somebody know that this was, that's why my language, and I think David's language, is kind of leaving something in there that spoke to the issue without making it restrictive. Seems like it would be a way to kind of resolve their concern, but acknowledge that this is really a broader perspective.
Would a memo back to KLRD on this matter be potentially sufficient? And the memo be something to the effect of what it is that we are discussing around the course itself, and the course being, as I think what we are discussing, it being about an overview on the methods of individual counseling, and how within that course there will be matters related to assessing substance use. And it doesn't necessarily have to be explicitly stated.
Let's say shall include, so that the very first sentence, so whatever we put in there will be required. We'll have, if the course would have to include that specifically stated in course description.
Just a technical note, the report says KLRD, because KLRD is one of the groups that staffs the committee, but really the report is meant to reflect the feedback of the members of that legislative committee. So
and also, had we not stricken the word substance use, this would not be a conversation at all, and it would not have been known to this legislative committee that there was anything being omitted. And so the fact is, if you're guiding what the regulation is, in my mind, number one talks about your training in substance use disorders. Specifically, number two is about a training method in individual counseling. Number three is in group counseling. And it's only highlighted because of words being removed to incorporate a broader scope of individual counseling. So if we feel like we need to compromise, I'm open to it. I'm absolutely no problem with it. But I think if when you read it in total, you're not reducing anything. And you're also helping people who may have an individual counseling course from another type of program.
That's why the change.
Yes,
Yes.
I get that. Does an example by putting an EG or example like that, does that?
Can you put each in?
I was gonna say, can you?
I don't, I've
It'll
never
probably
seen.
get kicked back.
And they did ask for definition of biopsychosocial, so we satisfied that with this explanation, a longer statement about what that means.
I would make a recommendation that we just leave it with the broader definition of biopsychosocial.
I would too.
I agree. I also like Richard's idea of providing an explanation that shows that we thoughtfully considered it and explained why we left it the same. Can we do that?
Yes, yeah, basically, after the meeting today, if the board was to approve a version of this, I'm happy to write a report back to the committee, explaining what the board did in response to the comments of the committee. And then I'm happy to put in as much feedback as you would like in terms of the reasons why the board took the action they did.
It sounds like addressing their concern that it somehow weakens it.
Right.
Yeah, I think that, oh, sorry, Dave.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna, reiterate the point of providing them with a memo explaining why it is that we left it out. I think that would be appropriate in this regard.
Yeah.
And I think it would be important to emphasize that we wanted to be more options for people getting their substance abuse license for the courses that could satisfy that. So that it's broader accessibility.
Okay, well, this is one of those items that usually we can do consensus, but on this one, maybe we should look for a motion to do a roll call vote on formally adopting this proposed language for those regulations. And we can do all of them together if you would like to. But I think probably we should have one motion to do a roll call vote to formally accept this proposed language.
I would move that we have a roll call vote to formally accept this proposal in whole.
I'll second that.
And Leslie brought up a point, maybe it's
It's to adopt
to
the
adopt. this.
proposed changes in the regulations.
To adopt.
Okay.
Amend my motion, to adopt the
Good.
proposed language as
For-
presented in total.
For KAR 10226, 10223, 10233A, 10243A, 10253, 10257B, 10251, 10273, 10274, 10275, 10277, and 10278.
Yes.
I just thought I'd list them for the minutes.
Thank you.
And Laura had a second to the amended motion.
Yes. Laura,
Yes,
you
thank
second?
you. I second that amended motion. Thank you.
And then roll.
Okay, we'll move to roll call then.
You're going to go ahead and read out the roll call.
Yes, please.
Mary Jones,
Aye.
David Anderson,
Aye.
Linda Heitzman Powell,
Aye.
Donna Hunter Quinn,
Aye.
Jackie Lightcap,
Aye.
Richard Nobles,
Aye.
Andrea Perdomo Morales,
Aye.
Cynthia Schindel,
Aye.
Laura Shaughnessy,
Aye.
David Stevens.
Aye.
Okay. Have a vote of 10-0. And then just for to be helpful, how about someone could make a motion to have us write a report back to the legislative committee explaining the reasons for the new language and then the discussion concerning the substance use to address their concerns.
So moved.
We'll take Richard as a second on that. Thank you, Andrea. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Thank you very much. Okay, not as hard as that packet looked. Thank you for putting that together so nicely for us to review. And the new business, we have an reappointment of advisory committee members. So I'll move to appoint Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee, Christina Boyd, Dulcinea Rakestraw. The Marriage and Family Therapy Advisory Committee, Nicole Eitzen, Chris Haben, Marcy Lichtenberg. To the Master's Level Psychology Advisory Committee, Iris Colley and Josh Tangway. To the Professional Counseling Advisory Committee, Melissa Briggs, Michael Countryman, Vanessa Perez. To the Social Work Advisory Committee, Mike Gillette, Leanne Gingery, and Robin Unruh. And those do not need board approval. So discussion on possible new language for advisory committee policy to allow former members to return after gap in service. I know this came up in our advisory committee, and I don't know if it's come up as topics in other groups, but there seems to be a lot of interest in taking a year off and being eligible to come back or some time period off from the advisory committees and or board and resume service at some point. I know it's a common practice in a lot of organizations for board, so that's the next discussion item.
Yeah, through the copy of the advisory committee policy. Under the structure of the committee in that document, it says terms for the advisory committee members will be 2 years. They can be appointed by the chair of the BSRB and can serve up to 4 terms. But no language currently exists in terms of saying they can come back after a certain period of time. So if there was a proposal on this, we could add new language to the advisory committee. If that would be something that you would be interested in. The statutory language for board members currently says board members will serve a 4-year term appointed by the governor, and they can be reappointed for 1 more term for maximum length of service of 8 years. It also has no language in the statute whether they come back after a certain gap of time or whether, it talks about 2 terms consecutively. So this is something people have asked about before for advisory committee members, but without any language to the contrary, it seemed like they could serve 4 terms, so that's 4 terms essentially for life. So if you wanted to take a different route after some discussion today, we could add language that would clarify that.
So what, if we were to change that, would it be that after a certain period of time, they could serve again for another 4 terms? And then is that in perpetuity? They could take another break and serve another 4 terms, or would we just be trying to allow a second set of 4 terms?
So in terms of the technical question, this is essentially a subcommittee of the board. We call them the advisory committees, but that's essentially how they're organized. And so there really isn't specific instructions to that point in the statutes. And the regulations, really, there's not a detailed one on the advisory committees. So really what we have is that 3rd tier of authority, which is the policies. And so the advisory committee policy is something that you can make changes or review whenever you would like to. So you have a lot of flexibility on this, whatever you'd like to do.
And service on the advisory committee does not preclude service to the board, so they operate in isolation.
Sort of, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, for the most part, the non-board members, yes.
That's what I mean.
yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Because the statutes say how many years of service board members can serve, and so that would have to go through the change in law. But and for the advisory committees, it always says you have a board member for that profession, you have a public board member, but the other non-board members on the advisory committee, there's a lot of flexibility with how long they can serve or when they can come back.
I think it's great to add that piece in. I would also wonder though, how we continue efforts to have new voices on committees. And so I wouldn't want to nominate someone back if that means that other voices aren't going to be able to be at the committee level. So
Yeah, I see it at both ends too, because I think sometimes it takes so long for advisory committees to get up to speed and really understand. And then by that time, it's like, oh no, I'm just really feeling this committee assignment. So I appreciate what you're saying too. And I think the intent of probably how this was set up was to make sure that there's always new people coming in. And I think there's some really rich history with people who've been around and know a little bit. I know I have in the MFT advisory committee members, people who are saying, can I come back at a certain point? You know, that.
So is there a balance with a percentage of the members being newly appointed and a percentage being those who
Returning.
could return, so you don't end up with people just staying on and on and on, but you have the opportunity for those who have really good historical knowledge or really interested in.
Do all the advisory committees have the same number of people on them? No.
Well, they could. The policy says for non-board members, you can have as few as 3 and as many as 10 non-board members. And so right now there's sort of a range. Some may have about 5 or 6, some may have closer to 9 or 10.
So if we were going to create that kind of a balance equation, we'd have to do it by percentage. Instead of like, if we can have a max of X number on the committee, we could say no more than 2 or 3 of those slots would be filled by people who had previously served their 4 terms and were returning. But if they're all different numbers, then we have to say a percentage. So
Yeah.
no more than 10% or whatever we would.
So the policy has talked about serving no more than 4 2-year terms, but I know several years in the past, it was sort of like terms would kind of blend together. But at least recently, we've really been trying to reach out to people to say, okay, you're coming up on the end of a 2-year term. Do you want to be reappointed? And that's been pretty well received. Having communication, almost everybody wants to be reappointed, but there's a handful that do step off. But if, you know, kind of what you were talking about, if you're looking at a percentage, just as an option that I'll throw out there for discussion, you know, if you're adding more than 1 member, you could say something like at least 1 new appointee should be someone who has not served on the advisory committee before. Most of the people that are looking for new members are looking for at least 2. So just an idea. You can, you know, like I said, you have total range of considering lots of possibilities, but that could be a way to maintain a balance.
Well, and even if you, let's say we said a year off or something like that, I mean, the likelihood of everyone who termed off wanting to come back after that next year is pretty small too. So,
Or they could at least be eligible for reconsideration.
Yes.
Doesn't mean they necessarily.
Or automatically.
yeah,
If
right.
there's 6 applicants, the committee could still decide whether they wanted to pull somebody who had a unique perspective.
I mean, we don't normally have an excess of people wanting to be on the advisory committees, right? Right.
There's a couple of them where there's a lot of, it kind of correlates to number of licensees.
Oh, okay.
So when we send the out, we usually send it out to all licensees. And for social work, there tends to be a large number of individuals interested. After that is probably professional counseling, that kind of corresponds to number of licensees. But for the smaller professions, sometimes it can be less than 10.
So do we need both? I mean, I see that the benefit of having you have to take some time off so that people aren't serving 20 years on an advisory committee. So I like that idea first, maybe to say, should we add language that says they need X amount of time off and what's that X amount of time? Is everyone thinking we should have that?
I'm not even sure why we would anything.
Okay.
Because this doesn't say. I think it says 2 years,
Mhm.
4 terms.
4 terms. There's nothing that says you can't come back in 10 years.
But if it says 2-year and 4 terms, if
That's
you've
a limit.
served 4 terms, then the implication to me is
Yes,
it's
okay.
done.
And I'm looking at it.
But I see what you're saying.
Back after it.
And 2 years off kind of fits the cycle.
I was gonna say it should be 2, yeah, because that's the
Yeah.
term, so.
Yeah.
A minimum of 2 years.
after 2 years on.
And then
Be
eligible,
reappointed
Then eligible.
or eligible for reappointment.
We're fine, right?
So the intent is not to limit someone to 8 years. And if they cycle off and then they spend 2 years not on the panel, then they can be reappointed and serve more than 4 terms.
yes, I think that's what we're saying, that they could come back and be then eligible to that
I mean,
2-year, 4 terms.
you may be able to read it both ways, but I mean, I would almost read it as you can serve up to 4 terms regardless of whether they're consecutive or not. You serve 4 terms and you're done.
And I think the request, at least from our advisory, was, but can we come back after that? Because they enjoy the work and contributed well to the work, and so they're wanting to figure out, is this the end, or is there an opportunity?
And, you know, let's say somebody served 4 terms when they were fresh out of school.
Mhm.
And they came in with a new perspective, and then they got really busy with work, so they took time off, and now they're more mature in their work and they've got more experience. Personally, I wouldn't want to exclude that person from being able to, you know, advise and bring their expertise and experience to bear.
You could add language, I mean, something effective 4 terms consecutively, if that's the intent, and then maybe another clarifying statement that after being relieved of your service, you can be reappointed after 2 years or whatever that is.
Yeah, so again, in our case, we have 2 people, I believe, who will have hit 8 years. And so by what you're saying, if I'm following you, it wouldn't matter because they've done their 4 terms. So that would be lifetime 4 terms. And I think what the question is can I serve take a period off and would I be eligible to come back?
Well, I think what Tim's talking about is, right now it just says you can serve to 4 terms.
Mhm.
But if you added the word consecutively, so you can serve up to 4 consecutive terms. And then some language about after a 2-year gap, you can be considered for reappointment to the advisory committee.
Oh, okay, all right, okay. Missing that.
That way you could do 4 2-year gap, and then you could be
Sure.
reappointed, I guess, in theory, up to another 4-year terms and then a
Mhm.
2-year gap, so.
They're consecutive.
However you wanna.
That makes sense to me, sorry, I wasn't hearing that.
And like I said, it's all on the table, so
Yeah.
you have a lot of flexibility with this.
So what if somebody serves 2 2-year terms consecutively, then takes a couple of years off?
Then they're eligible for 2.
They're currently under what we have now, they could be reappointed for another 2 terms.
Yes.
And we're just wanting to make that sort of in perpetuity, that after you complete the 4 terms you're allowed, whether they're consecutive or not. Take a break, then you could be reappointed.
And we've had a few people that have served in the past, maybe a term, and then stepped off, and then they've done things for a few years and come back. And so essentially, we essentially said you're in your 2nd term, we
Right.
know that you
Even though
previously
it's 2
served.
years. So we just wanna make it possible for people to continue to be reappointed. But after 4 terms, however many years they serve those 4 terms over, they have to take a 2-year break.
Yeah, at least be eligible, I think is that the word that's important here, be eligible to come back.
But then do we need to add something about how many people on our committees, what percentage of members can be people that have already served their 4 terms?
So do you think you need it, particularly if we have this sort of 2-year cycle? I mean, that would be a lot of ifs for everyone coming back every 2 years. Do you think we need it?
No, because it goes back to the issue if they're eligible for or not.
Right.
Doesn't mean they're automatically coming back. The committee could still consider them and not pick.
Right, yeah, we have the option to choose if we've got more people than slots. And that can be a point of consideration. Without it being formalized.
And like you said, not everybody wants to come back.
I don't know why not. but-
Some people are disillusioned when they serve on the committee. Well, it's a little bit more than I
Just- or
expected.
it, or
Yeah.
there's all sorts of reasons. So board, are we ready to make a decision on this? And suggest some language to this policy being amended to include the consecutive terms as well as a 2-year break or whatever best word would describe that before being eligible for to reapply.
And does that make them eligible for an additional set of 4, or is it literally?
And then another 2-year break, could they do another? 4? Like, that we're getting into a long career.
So very. They'd be getting old.
I know this is a little off topic, so I apologize. Are we wanting or needing to add anything about participation once you've been selected? Did I miss that in here?
Well, that wasn't the matter we talked about, but I think you have a very important matter to talk about, which is engagement in the advisory committee, so. Can I hold that
Yeah, please.
topic and then? Okay. Okay, so, it sounds like we have some agreement, we'll make a formal motion at some point, but we have some agreement in the first part. The second part, as Dave is bringing up, is then what? How long can you serve? Post that, do you go back to those 4-year terms? Are we wanting to say, really, in total, we don't want you serving more than 16 years on an advisory committee?
I think it's reasonable.
Yes.
So then you can say after a 2-year period, you're maybe eligible to serve up to 4 additional terms.
Mhm.
Language good?
Consecutive.
Okay,
But
consecutive or not consecutive, I guess would be,
Yeah,
and the
either way.
second term, do we care if it's consecutive or not? Or?
do
that
we
first
care if
is-
it's consecutive the first?
Yeah.
No, we don't.
Yeah, I
We
don't
don't.
think
So
so.
I think 4 terms, even if there's gaps in between.
No more than
Then you
16.
must take 2 years off.
Okay.
Then you can do 4 more terms, even if there's some gaps in between, but then you're done at 16 years.
Could take you 20.
Well, that would be at least 18 if you did everything consecutive.
You feel good on the language of that?
I think so. I mean, it sounds like advisory committee member terms will be 2 years. You can serve 4 terms, but after your 4th term, you'll need to have at least a 2-year gap
Yeah,
between seeking reappointment to the advisory committee. And then if you are reappointed to the advisory committee after your initial 4 terms, you could serve 4 additional terms.
or couldn't you just put in there not to exceed 16 years? Or not to exceed
8 terms.
8 terms?
Yeah.
There's something in there.
And the first 4 terms are, I think this gets to Cynthia's point, those are non-consecutive, right?
They may or may not be.
Yeah, those may or may not be consecutive. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think one of the initial proposals I put out was maybe 4 consecutive years and then a gap of 2 years. But that's not always what we see. We see some people who do a term, are off for a while, and then come back. And I always say, well, you've served 1 term already, so you're in your 2nd term. So, so just avoiding the word consecutive, but serve up to 4 terms, 2-year gap, and then as many as 4.
And it wouldn't include board members.
No, their advisory committee service would be different if they were a former board member.
I'm just thinking if they've been on the advisory committee for a while and then got appointed to the board,
Where they would be serving on the advisory.
they're still on the advisory
Yeah.
committee, but they might run out of eligibility.
That's
They
a
were,
good point.
So,
they were gonna serve 2 terms on the
Well,
board,
that could prevent them being appointed to the board. If they're-
right? If they've been
If
on
they've
there
already had 8 years on their advisory committee.
under the current rules.
so it says here, the policies and procedures under which the BSRB board members are expected to operate will also apply to the advisory committee members.
And so,
So that's to Dave's point would be,
So we've always treated service as a non-board member as separate from service as a board member. Because if we applied it literally to everybody,
Okay.
then I would have to stop attending meetings after 4 terms.
So could we say terms for non-board member advisory committee? Or we could say
Yeah.
non-board advisory committee members, we'll start that sentence.
Yes.
Okay,
Absolutely.
great point.
No, that's good.
So then
Good
that
point.
would take away that problem. If somebody had done their 8 years on the advisory committee and then became a board member, they would still be allowed to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. That's good.
Okay, so we have enough language that we all feel like we can feel good about that. Do we need a motion on that?
If you'd like to, if not, I mean, it seems like it's a consensus after the discussion, but it's up to you if you want to do it by consensus or.
I think consensus works.
Okay.
So, to Andrea's point now, this, I don't see a covered, but I can't remember in our advisory committee training, if you specifically cover engagement and participation and in the advisory committee.
So
And
Cynthia just found that you just read, Mary, the policies and procedures under which the BSRB board members are expected to operate will apply also to the advisory committee members. So I think we do have some language as a board member.
Yeah, during the training, I usually point to that line. It is a little bit vague in terms of how much to apply that. The language for board members says, and the expectations for board members document said board members should have no more than one unexcused absence per year. In terms of enforcement of that, we've been usually pretty flexible and we haven't really, hasn't really come into play too much, but that is something we could definitely, you know, if we wanted to put some clearer language in here in terms of advisory committee members' expectations in terms of attendance or participation, that could be something we could add language for.
Yeah, we certainly have.
And we've had some advisory committees that have struggled to have quorum at times. And there may be people that are really good advisory committee members that simply are overcommitted and lack time sometimes. And so it's something to, I mean, I balance that. And when I look at the associations on voluntary time for it, you can only get so many hours in the day. And so if you want to add any language in here, you could in terms of expectations for participation or attendance or things like that.
could I make a recommendation that you bring to the next board meeting, some suggestions, even if they're coming from the board member expectations that we could look at and just look at in a policy standpoint?
Now, the good thing about taking care of the terms is that each of the advisory committees had asked me to reach out to recruit people. But I've held those because I thought I would wait for this item to be determined to know who all could consider themselves for membership. So I will adjust the language and then send that out to everyone because there may be some former members who want to be considered this member.
Okay, great, thank you very much. The next item is appointment for the Kansas Fight Addiction Grant Review Board. As you're aware, Jason Hess is our representative. And looks like we must need to reappoint him on annual and.
So to kind of frame this, about 3 years ago, the Kansas legislature passed a bill called the Kansas Addictions Act, or Kansas Addictions Grant Act, and it created the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board. And so money from federal lawsuits is collected by the Attorney General, and then there is appointed committee, board that receives requests for grant funding in the state of Kansas to provide addiction-related services. And there are a number of different entities or individuals who are able to appoint a person to serve on that board. And so about almost 2 years ago, the board appointed Jason Hess to be the board's designee on the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board. And at that time, the board said, should we have a certain time period where we revisit this decision to see if we should reappoint someone to continue to serve in that role? And it was the board's decision at that time that they would revisit that every 2 fiscal years. So we're coming upon the end of that 2 fiscal years. And Jason Hess has served in that capacity. He's attended meetings regularly. He has been submitting reports for the board packets. And so I've included those under my report for you to read. We did reach out to him between the last meeting and this meeting to see if he would be interested in being reappointed. And he is very interested in continuing to serve in that capacity. He's actually in his final term on the advisory committee. But he said he's gotten a lot of value out of serving on that grant review board. And he'd like to continue to serve if the board would like him to do that. Jill Flessing, the chair of the Addictions Counseling Advisory Committee, she could not attend the meeting today, but she did send me a message and asked if I'd pass it along. So do you mind if I read her comments on this? She said, I'm writing to extend my support for Jason Hess to be reappointed as the board's representative on the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board. Jason is about to complete his 4th and final term on the Addictions Counselor Advisory Committee, and his wisdom will be missed on our committee. Jason has over 30 years experience in the substance use disorder field in Kansas and numerous roles. His work now as executive director for Heartland RADAC provides vital leadership in an ever-evolving helping field in the state of Kansas. Jason's professional experience has granted him awareness of SUD treatment needs of Kansas from all types of backgrounds across the state. Jason has expressed willingness and excitement to be reappointed to the Kansas Fights Addiction Board. I support his reappointment also, and I'm grateful for his professional knowledge and dedication.
Does that mean in the next cycle, he would no longer be eligible? And so they need to kind of be thinking who they would recommend.
Well, so
Does he have to be a part of that group?
he doesn't. Okay, no, there were in terms of looking to see who could serve as the board's designee on this board. There was some language in the statute that talked about having an expertise in the area of addictions or substance use, I believe. But it was a bit open. And so I think the initial members, some of them were administrators in different capacities. So there was kind of a broad range of individuals who serve on this board, even though it was only about 10 or 9 individuals. But he does not have to be a member of the board or a member of the advisory committee. It's helpful that he has been a member of the advisory committee as a connection. But yeah, he will be coming off the advisory committee at the end of June, serving his 4th term. So he will need to come off of the advisory committee. But there's no similar restrictions off of serving in this capacity.
And we can still get a report from him as our appointee, as the board's appointee, even if he's on the advisory committee.
And if you would ever like him to attend a meeting in person or on screen, I could ask him to do that. We had one addiction counseling advisory committee meeting about a year ago, and he was able to attend that one in person here.
Are there any questions, comments, concerns about having a non-advisory committee member appointed as our designee?
None.
I think it would be valuable if he could attend, 1 or 2 meetings in person. I mean, it's nice that he submits a written report, but I think it would be helpful for the board to maybe even ask questions that we haven't asked questions. So, I would recommend that maybe at least twice a year he come to provide some more formal report to the board. In terms of the item at hand, then, hearing no question or no concerns on that, can I do this one myself or do we need it? Okay, then I will appoint Jason Hess as the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board designee. The BSRB.
Actually,
You need to say that differently, or it needs to be a board.
there probably needs to be a board.
Yes.
Yeah, some of the items like the
Since it's not a committee member.
yeah, it's delegated to the chair.
Okay.
It could be a board appointee.
I will take a motion to approve.
So moved.
I'll second. Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Hi.
Any opposed, same sign. Okay, great, thank you. And then we have appointment of board members to the hearing panel for the master's level psychology license applicants.
Yes, and so basically, when we have individuals who are denied licensure, they have the opportunity to request a hearing in front of the board. And we have had an individual applicant for master's level psychology license request a hearing. What the board has said in the past is that if we have these hearings, we would want the board member for that profession to be serving on that hearing panel. So that would be David Anderson. They would also like there to be a public member. And then they would like there to be essentially 5 board members on these hearing panels in general. So I am happy to take volunteers if anybody would like to serve in this capacity. And if you would like some training beforehand, I'd be happy to have a conversation so that some of our board members who have not served in that capacity before. But essentially, we need 5 board members. David Anderson, there needs to be a public member, and then the remaining 3 members could be any board members.
Do you know when this? When would occur?
It will be probably sometime in the next, probably about 2 months away. Usually we set some time for scheduling and make sure there could be an exchange of exhibits and things like that. And it usually has been remote. So we need to check availability of the person, board members, and then the person that facilitate the hearing. So probably would be no earlier than 2 months in the future, and it would based on the availability of board members and other people.
I would volunteer to be on the board as long as it's after June 12th.
Okay.
And I can do it as the public member.
Okay.
Thank you, Donna.
So we just need 2 more board members.
I'll serve.
I will
One
too.
more. Okay, thanks, Laura. Okay, we have 5 members.
That's 5 minutes. Okay.
I can be a backup if needed.
Thank you, Andrea. Great.
Okay, next is discussion and possible comments on letters from Department of Veteran Affairs.
You want me to?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Mhm.
So these are a couple of unusual items, but I wanted to bring them to your attention to get board member feedback on. They're both letters from the Veterans Affairs Office. The first is in your packet. This is by a woman named Lisa Wooten. She's a health assistance specialist for the National Intimate Partner Violence Assistance Program, Care Management and Social Work Services. About once a year, she has reached out to the board and essentially licensing boards that license social workers in different states, and has asked for different boards to take a position on social workers and their use of Narcan or naloxone. And so in the front page of that document, it says, in March 2023, the Food and Drug Administration approved Narcan 4 milligram naloxone hydrochloride nasal spray for over-the-counter non-prescriptive use, which paves the way for life-saving medication to reverse an opioid overdose to be sold directly to consumers. However, without written support from the state social work licensing board, VA social workers are not permitted to carry and administer naloxone. They asked for a response back, but I let them know I'd be bringing this to the board meeting and would let them know after the board had a chance to discuss. On the second page, it's essentially a letter to different state licensing boards for social work. And it talks a little bit about the background on this topic and individuals with drug overdose. Talks a little bit about the Surgeon General issuing an advisory committee on naloxone and opioid overdose from 2018. What they are asking from us at the request is to complete one of the following statements and sign below to include the date and title of the signer, either the director, president, or the board leadership, to either say the state of Kansas Social Work Licensing Board concurs social workers in the state can carry and administer Narcan or naloxone. The state of Kansas Social Work Licensing Board concurs social workers in the state can carry and administer Narcan and naloxone only if the social worker has completed education and training in order to do so, or the state of Kansas Social Work Licensing Board does not concur and social workers in the state can carry and administer Narcan or naloxone under any circumstances. And I think in the past, what the board has done is when we receive these types of requests, we have not taken a position, in part because it is a little unclear what authority, if any, verbal direct comment from the board would have on this matter. Seems to be more of something that, you know, they talk about us being a creature of statute or regulation. And this seems to be a little bit outside of that. So in the past, the board has not taken an official position on it.
Can we say that it is not prohibited under the current regulations?
That's what I kind of wonder, if you can go in the direction of, because I completely understand what our jurisdiction is, and also, you know, everyone, we're training all workforce for Narcan, and you really
It's
don't even
available
have to
all
be
the time.
trained,
Yeah.
because the reality is you're not going to do any harm when you administer Narcan. So, is there a way that we can sufficiently meet that by saying something like that? We don't prohibit,
Under current regulations, it's not prohibited.
although that's a little.
I don't know, and Tim and I have not had a great deal of conversation on this topic, but Tim, if you have any thoughts, I'd be curious. I know in the past, the board has also referenced perhaps maybe contacting the Board of Nursing, because they have a little bit more authority in terms of prescribing, or at least, you know, administering certain things. But I don't know. Wanted to bring it to you because this is something that has come around in the past, and you have any thoughts, Tim?
Well, I mean, do we, yeah, I guess the first question would be, do we think it's within the scope of practice that's authorized? And that would be as a social worker, I can do this. I don't know, I'm not sure. I mean, I can reach your scope statutes and I mean, it's not directly addressed. I would err on the side of caution as the board in that situation. I mean, the other side of the coin is, you know, based on the nature of what it is, you know, you certainly don't want to step into the realm of practicing healing arts. There's an exception in the Healing Arts Act for gratuitous services that you would not perform as a social worker, just as a good Samaritan. Doesn't constitute the practice of healing arts, and so it has to be an emergency situation as well.
So that's where I was kind of going for. I think you were going right there, which is if you think about from CPR standpoint, if you're out on the street somewhere and someone's needing life-saving supports and emergency services, I wouldn't think about my license first in that situation. And so is this that same thing? And is Narcan specifically called out in any Good Samaritan type laws at this point? I know there's been, I've seen some things nationally.
Yeah, you know, I don't know if Kansas has a Good Samaritan statute. You may, but at the very least, it's common law.
Yeah.
And so it applies. But I don't know that the issue is, you know, as a board, do you want to take the position that, you know, a social worker can do this in your capacity as a social worker? I'm not sure that that's the best approach as opposed to, and so, you know, your 1 through 3 options here don't seem to be very good fits for that reason. But certainly I don't see any reason why, you know, if you have a client in that situation, why you can't administer it on an emergency basis. You're, you know, I suppose as long as you're not giving them a bill after the fact for saving their life. You know,
And it's an over-the-counter drug, so does it even fall under something that you have to, you know, observe Board of Healing Arts?
I think it could, yeah.
standards?
I don't know that it necessarily has to, you know, be a prescription-based drug to trigger the practice of healing arts. I mean, that's kind of the gray area, but if you stay within, an emergency as it always would be, and you do it free of charge, I think the other pieces, you know, I'm not doing this in my capacity as a social worker. I'm just doing this as a person to save your life. I mean, so that's kind of the conundrum. I think I'm not sure again that any of their boxes, you know, but
Well, if I read this again, it says to the state board governing social work practice, the VHA National Social Work Program is seeking information on state licensing boards on the ability of licensed social workers within the state's jurisdiction. Well, I agree with what you're saying, Tim. I don't think it's carved out in a scope of practice anywhere. And so if anything, our statement is along those lines of it's not part of the scope of practice of being a social worker or any other licensed professional if you're not. But I'm surprised the eviction counselors never brought this up.
Yeah. That's what I was just thinking.
Because it's a VA regulation, it looks like to me, right?
But there's addiction counselors that are social workers.
Absolutely.
And so, and it could well be within the scope of practice if that's your primary clients.
But what it
And
tells
then
me,
are you negligent if you work with substance abuse clients and you have this life-saving option that you don't have available to you?
that's where
I
it
mean, I
feels
can
like
see
the
the other side
CPR
of it.
thing to me is like
Yeah.
you are administering a life-saving intervention
Which
without
is
respect
much more
to
likely if you're
your
working-
scope of practice in your license.
Yeah.
But it sounds to me like the VHA is looking for, because they have some regulation. Right? That's what I would infer from this. There's a regulation there that they're trying to.
Both of these, they kind of take a different, because one of them is just asking us to confirm, and the other one is saying basically that the federal regs supersede whatever the state requirement would be. So.
If it's
I
a
don't-
oh, I'm sorry, Cynthia. If it's a VA regulation, what's going through my mind is a question of how would this interact with insurance liability matters? Like if if say there was a suit against a social worker because the social worker administered Narcan and for some reason something went wrong, would liability insurance cover the social worker? And that gets back to this matter of, well, the social worker wasn't practicing within their scope of practice. Like, how would insurance matters factor into all of this if we were to say, yes, we approve of this?
Well, saying it's not prohibited isn't the same as that it's an approved. I guess to assume anything that's not specifically prohibited is approved.
Yeah, that's where I was just like, I
Is
think
that
that
legal?
was more difficult language than no position.
Yeah, I mean, well, so in a liability situation, if it's addressed to the courts, I mean, the board can take an opinion, I suppose, on what the law means, but it, you know, for the last 15 years or whatever, it's no longer been binding on the courts. The courts can interpret the law and say what the law is. So even if the board would come out and say, this is the scope of practice, if a court would disagree on what the law actually is, the board opinion would have no binding effect. Called the doctrine of operative construction, that was abolished in 2009 or so. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's a very good point about liability insurance and what is communicated. You know, there'd be, I suppose, some interplay too with the Good Samaritan law as far as what you've done, but it wouldn't necessarily, you know, impute itself into your license as a social worker. So the insurance company may deny coverage. You may then have, you know, very good defense based on the Good Samaritan law with respect to what you did to save somebody's life. So it's, I mean, there's some complex questions there. I hope that provides some kind of answer.
So a quick, I'm sorry, go ahead, Dave.
I think your original point, though, that it's really outside the scope of practice, which makes it outside of what we determine what people can and can't do in their professional roles. Not to mention that, you know, even they say above, you know, you should know how to use this. And I know not really gonna hurt people, but prior to taking the training myself, I didn't know that sometimes you have to get multiple dosage. And so if you don't know what you're doing, I think that's certainly not a good idea, but this really kind of paints us into a corner that I think is not appropriate for what this board has decided to do.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just reading a quick Google search around generally covered under Good Samaritan laws, which Kansas does not have one, Tim, to your point. But I think I'm in agreement. I don't see how we, as the BSRB, can say anything for any licensees on this matter, because
Even addictions counselors?
well, is it part of the scope of practice to administer medication as a licensed addiction? I mean, so again, you get into this, are you administering medication, or are you providing a life-saving measure like CPR, such as CPR? And I think for us right now, it's not specifically listed under their scope of practice on any of them. But you could still do CPR. If I'm trained in CPR, I can still provide life-saving intervention with something.
Right, because you're not doing that
Right.
as a BSRB professional.
Right.
If you think it's standard of care, maybe you need to pursue some legislation
Yeah.
that clears up the issue.
Okay, so if I understand and hear everyone correctly, we feel like this is outside of our jurisdiction to respond or to be able to say what they're asking us to say. We can certainly respond and say we don't feel like it falls under our jurisdiction. At least for the social worker. And then did you want to go into the marriage and family therapy?
Sure. Yeah, so the next document you have is from the National Standards of Practice team on behalf of the VHA Office of Regulations, Appeals and Policy. And essentially what they have sent to me and ultimately to the board is they are trying to establish standard of practice for marriage and family therapy at VA facilities, if I am reading this correctly. And what they are doing is they're reaching out to different states to be able to provide comments on what they're proposing for what marriage and family therapists can do at VA facilities. The message that they sent to Kansas on for the last page of that document says VA proposed marriage and family therapist standard of practice does not vary from your state's licensure requirements. However, there may be variances for other states' requirements. So I think some of the language in this letter does clarify that even though what their standard of practice may be for marriage and family therapists at VA facilities might be different, the actions those people do under marriage and family therapy could lead to disciplinary complaints. So the BSRB would still be able to regulate those individuals if there was a complaint concerning their practice at the VA facility. But they did want to send this out to us. They wanted acknowledgement that we had received it, which I have provided back to them already. And then they wanted to let us know that those proposed standards are open for public comment until June 25th, 2024. If the board wanted to provide any feedback, or, you know, as individuals, you could also provide feedback on those as well. But
So I have a question, because on the first page, second paragraph, it says these standards apply exclusively to VA employees, and most VA healthcare professionals will not experience blah, blah, blah. National standards also protect VA healthcare professionals from state disciplinary action that's based solely on those professionals practicing within the scope of their VA employment. And so
Then the next sentence, they're concerned, it says it doesn't prevent states from taking disciplinary actions.
So do they have to be licensed to be a VA professional?
Leslie and I've talked about this a little bit. I believe if you are licensed in a state and practicing at a VA facility, you can be in a different state as long as you're within a VA facility. Is that right?
So you don't have to really be licensed in Kansas to practice at one of our VA facilities.
Right, it's a federal installation, so it's.
So then that would fall outside of our jurisdiction.
Mostly. There is some language here that says it does not prevent state boards from taking disciplinary actions against healthcare professionals for negligence or misconduct. So it'd probably be a higher bar, I would imagine. You could still do an investigation, but it would probably be a higher bar than individuals practicing under our state license requirements.
There's also a sentence about consider creating an exemption for federal government employees within your state. Do we know, have other states done that?
I have not heard of that, if they have.
Sounds like they're trying to fix a employment.
But they state on page 2 that the national standard of practice preempts any limitations that the state may place on practice, as long as they're practicing consistent with the VA, the national standard. So they're claiming that whatever the state's rules are don't matter if they're practicing within the allowed scope as a VA subject. But then they're wanting us to endorse that in some way.
And there are some other states that probably have a different standard, you know, comparatively. They made a reference on the last page that said your state laws don't conflict, but there are some that probably do. So.
Well, that group here has got kind of national standards, right? States are
Close.
interesting.
I know they're asking for a reply by June 25th. Would it be possible to have, or if we're open to asking for them to do a presentation to the board so that we can understand it further, or I'm not sure if that's.
They're not presenting the standards here, this letter. Could they send them along with?
There are links to those.
Oh,
yeah. So on the PDF copy that's posted, those links should go to where the website is. www.va.gov/standards of practice/federal register. .asp.
The way I interpret this is that they want to know if there's anything that we want specifically in that, but the reality is we're not looking at changing our standards of practice or scope of practice for marriage and family therapy, so this is just another one of those very bizarre. I mean,
It's preemptive on their part.
it sounds like it. So I'm hearing no action on that item. Unless, is anyone wanting Dave to send our MFT regulation? Sounds like they already have it, or they're set.
Sounds like they've looked at it.
Yeah,
Does your advisory committee, would they want to take a look at those?
we could certainly put it on the agenda as an item in terms of recommendations. I think it's a board decision really, but at the end of the day, we can't. To me, it's a closed network system of the VA, and so to address it from a state perspective seems. Yes, ma'am?
I think they think the same thing. That's what I think.
But I think it's a good topic item for our advisory committee so that they're aware and they can look at those regulations themselves.
Yeah, it sounds like-
Federal Register.
I mean, they run a national system and they're
Mhm.
trying to make it easier to not have to have 50 different ways of thinking about all of these things.
Okay, next item is consideration of recommendations from advisory committees. Looks like the behavior analysts have some recommendations they're putting forward.
Yes, so these were voted on and forwarded from the Behavior Analyst Advisory Committee. And Linda, feel free to add any context as I go through these, but essentially the way that the behavior analyst statutes are organized, instead of outlining a lot of the same things the other professions do, it really says more that the licensing board will essentially develop a regulation for certain things. So when we passed a lot of flexibilities back in Senate Bill 131 during the 2023 legislative session, the behavior analysts didn't have the same framework to put these in. And so now we're going to the advisory committee to try to do a regulation to accomplish a lot of the same things that statute did to their professions. So for example, when the behavior analyst statutes were put into place, there was no language that would have authorized the BSRB to be able to reinstate a license. So if someone's license expired, they just had to reapply for license from the beginning. But we were able to add in language into Senate Bill 131 to add authority for the BSRB to develop regulations on reinstatement. And then that is where this comes into play. So this example regulation, it has on here 102-8-7A, but that's really sort of where we thought it would logically fit. And it essentially mirrors the same terminology you see for the other professions. It talks about the process by which you can reinstate a license if it has expired. It identifies that there would be a reinstatement fee. It talks about the reinstatement form, and then also reinstatement for individuals who are not practicing for other reasons, such as having a suspended license or a license that has been revoked, and what they would need to provide in those types of situations. It also includes a modification to the fee regulation. This fee regulation has another adjustment the board has voted on before to lower the renewal fees for behavior analysts. So that's not reflected in this language, but essentially whenever that would go forward, it would include that item and this item that the board votes to approve this. But essentially it would provide language to allow for the reinstatement of the assistant behavior analyst license, and then also reinstatement of the behavior analyst license. So essentially for the other professions, this is already language in the statutes, and this is the behavior analyst effort to go ahead and accomplish the same thing.
You voted to reduce the renewal fee, so would we reduce the reinstatement fee too? Right, isn't that what the board, I wasn't at that meeting.
So the renewal fee was basically to reduce those amounts by half. So I guess I guess that is a question, right? Because the reinstatement fee is generally the amount of the renewal fee,
Mhm.
so. That is a good point. If the renewal fees did decrease from 70 down to 20. Then the renewal of a behavior analyst license would reduce from 120 down to 70. So since those were basically reduced by 50 each, the reinstatement fee, if you wanted to make that what the other ones are, would be 20 for the assistant behavior analyst and then 70 for the behavior analyst. That's a good.
Linda, anything to add from?
No, it just means that we're growing up. Right, you know what I mean? When it originally got pushed through. No behavior analyst out in the field had any kind of experience with developing rules and regulations. And so I think this is just an effort to bring us in line with other professions.
I forgot to mention one more thing. There is language on A1 and 2, but essentially it also adopts what the board put in place for people whose license has been expired for over a year. They could come in for half the amount. They come back. So that is something also the board added for other professions to incentivize people returning to the workforce, and that is included in these regulations as well.
Okay, let's take a motion then. Do we want to go ahead and take a motion to approve the regulations for behavior analysts as proposed in the draft with the amendments of the fee structure? Thank you, David. Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign? Fantastic. Okay, so the next one I have is the draft regulation for behavior analysts for services rendered in another state.
Yes, and so I can tell you the purpose of this regulation. There was a question I had with one of the members of the board right before the meeting, so we may need to table this to make sure we clarify that correctly. But the purpose behind this regulation for the other professions, there is a regulation that says when we're looking to see where services are being performed, we are looking at the location of the client. And so the behavior analysts don't have a regulation to that effect. So this was an intent to kind of standardize that. So if you look at section A, so at the top it says basically each person, regardless of the person's physical location, who engages in either of the following activities shall be deemed to be engaged in the practice of applied behavior analysis in this state and shall be required to have a license issued by the board to practice applied behavior analysis as a licensed behavior analyst or licensed assistant behavior analyst as appropriate. In A, it says perform any act in the statute on or for one or more individuals who are physically located in the state at the time services are provided. Or B, represents oneself to be a licensed behavior analyst or a licensed assistant behavior analyst available to perform any act in the statute on one or more individuals who are physically located in the state at the time services are provided. Now, I did not think about the way that this is worded. This was basically an attempt to take the language, I believe, from the marriage and family therapy regulation on the same topic and kind of mirror the same thing. But depending on how you read this, where it talks about shall be deemed to be engaged in the practice of applied behavior analysis in this state and shall be required to have a license issued by the board to practice applied behavior analysis as a licensed behavior analyst or licensed assistant behavior analyst. It was not the intent to create this to try to frame the scope of practice for individuals that may hold other licenses. It was really to kind of say, if you're providing these services, if the client is located here, you need to be licensed here.
Well, I think that's appropriate because this clearly says you might have a license in a different discipline, but if you're gonna act as a behavior analyst, you need to be licensed as a behavior analyst in the state. Isn't that what this is saying?
I think that is what it says. I just think the conversation around this regulation was, trying to make sure that we look at the location of the client.
Mhm.
Um,
But also that they had to be licensed in Kansas.
yes,
Right.
yes.
With the clients.
Yeah,
For individuals who are providing those services, if they don't hold a professional license, I just think in terms of a bigger conversation, in terms of individuals who may hold other licenses. If there might be a bigger question about scope of practice or people providing services. That wasn't a conversation that we had really gotten into in terms of the advisory committee, so. I was looking at some of that language right before the meeting, and if that was extending further, then. Yeah, that's what I kind of want to bring up to you today to say maybe this one needs to get tabled just for a meeting so we could kind of make sure that we're doing what we're intending to do.
I don't think I understand.
Well, so you have a statute that excludes the requirement to have a license. KSA 65-7503, subsection B. The licensing requirements of subsection A shall not apply to any person that gives a list of, any other component of licensure, I suppose. And I don't think that Dave, your point is that reference isn't in the regulation, and it should be. That's maybe part of your point.
Yeah, I just think a lot of the conversation was on identifying the location of the client for the terms of making sure that people are not doing unlicensed practice.
Right.
But if the discussion on this could interfere with people who are licensed in other professions and restrict their ability to provide services there. I mean, that wasn't really part of this discussion. So if it's applying to people who are not licensed to make sure they're getting licensed in Kansas, that's one thing. If there is sort of an interpretation that would go further than that concerning other licensed professionals, I want to make sure that we're all in agreement on what the language says, so.
Well, I would say that I think that's appropriate to say that because we're specifically talking about behavior analysis, we're not talking about any other license. So if they're licensed as a social worker or a master's level clinician or whatever, right? And they want to practice underneath that scope or that license, this does not apply. It's only if they want to practice behavior analysis. And then this exclusion was specifically written because we have under KDADS, we have autism specialists, and we have intensive individual support providers. There's also behavior analysts that work in the schools. And so those exceptions were written so that it protected or carved out that class of individuals or professionals that were practicing underneath either KDADS or the education department, so that they weren't subject to this regulation or this law that specifically outlined the practice of clinical behavior analysis, not educational or under KDADS, under the Medicaid waiver program. But I don't see any reason we can't take it back to the subcommittee since we're meeting in 2 weeks. I mean,
Well, I had another question too. The reference to 7502 subsection B, which that is the autism service provider.
that's us, or that's KDAD. That's the state Medicaid plan. And that was in effect back since in 2007 was when that was first developed, in 2008. And we didn't get, the licensing law didn't come in until 2012, 2015, somewhere around there. And so at that point, we had this whole class of service providers that had already been trained and were providing services, and so it was a carve out.
But would it be a grandfather carve out, or so if we, let's say, for example, I just want to make sure we're all clear. If we approve this new regulation, it doesn't preclude anyone else under those other services from providing those interventions. It solely says, if you're providing applied behavior analysis, you have to be licensed in the state and the client has to be in the state of Kansas.
that was our understanding at the subcommittee, that that's what this was.
That was their intention. Is there language though that's sounding? I just want to make sure I'm really following this.
Yeah,
Yeah, so my question was around then. Under B1. 657502. That provides diagnostic or treatment services for autism spectrum
Mhm.
disorders. So there are other professionals who do services
Yep.
that wouldn't be
correct.
applied behavior analysis.
And that was advocacy on the part of all the other professions that are more than capable of providing autism services, whether it's diagnostics or,
Yeah.
interventions or treatment or whatever, right?
So just want to make sure this change doesn't
Right.
include that.
Correct.
This doesn't say no to do that. You have to be.
And well, like if you think about it, right, think about CBT, right? It's got its basis in behavioral science. And so if you're gonna do CBT, does that mean you now can't do it because it falls under behavioral science and you're not licensed as a behavioral analyst? So those were some of the discussions that we were having back when this first went up for legislation in front of our legislators. It's like, no, people have been doing CBT for a lot longer than behavior analysts have been licensed, And so you can't tie up the market on all those treatment options that people have been doing for decades. And so there were carve outs specifically for currently existing licensed mental health practitioners, diagnosticians, school-based people providing services under the Kansas State Medicaid plan for the waiver programs, because those people were already practicing, right? And so, yes, the intent of this is not that it supersedes that. It's just to say, if I'm a behavior analyst in Georgia and I have a client that PCS changed duty stations to Kansas, I can continue to see them via telehealth as long as I'm licensed in Kansas.
Yeah, I think just to make sure that there's no unintended consequences.
Yeah,
This is one that I think there's not a real urgency to implement it, but it is a helpful one to put in. So maybe I'd recommend we just table this and the next board meeting.
Yeah, I appreciate that conversation. I think we always just want to be thoughtful for those kind of situations. So, okay, that'll be our recommendation to do that. And then the next one was on continuing education, requesting additional time, which I think we've done in the other professions. Is that correct?
That's right. It was put into the statute directly in 131. So
Yep.
this would be allow people with an extenuating circumstance to request up to 3 months of additional time. It doesn't extend their license, but if they're allowed that, they would have to submit some material to the plan, and then they could keep their license active.
And no variance from what we've done with other.
No, same language for the statute.
Okay, we have a motion to,
So move.
thank you.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Great, okay, board input regarding application of licensing status and regulations on respiratory therapy as a related field.
Yes. So nursing is considered a related field in the addiction counseling regulation. We have someone who has applied and is taking they have a bachelor's degree in respiratory care. And they are doing coursework and they've applied for a student license. And I don't know if respiratory care would be considered a related field.
To addictions.
Mhm.
I guess 14th cousin.
They haven't been
The reason we brought it to you is because even though there is one particular applicant, we're trying to make a uniform standard.
Right, of course. And I wouldn't brought it except that nursing is
a
a related field.
Right, so it's medical.
Right.
It's
And-
much more specific than nursing.
Yeah, I was trying to look up that student addiction language, but I think
It says that they have to have 60 hours in
In
a
a-
program that is addiction focused or related field. And because they already have their bachelor's degree, they don't have 60 hours in the addictions. They don't need that many. They only need 33, so. That's, I get. It's,
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Does anyone disagree with saying no to this?
It's too much of a stretch.
Okay. Do you want that as a motion or not?
No, I think we just say that.
Okay,
consensus.
consensus.
Yeah.
Okay, the next item is new licensing system, or is there something you want to get on here just in the interest of time? Is there something you're more concerned about than others, Dave?
Yeah, let's do I and J first.
Okay,
So essentially, this is something we had on the agenda for the last meeting, but in reviewing the minutes, I think we ran out of time before we got to it, but occasionally there are instances where someone does not have a practicum reference because it's been so long since that time period. Maybe the person passed away, maybe the program has ceased to exist, or it's just been many, many years, so they're not able to get that. So in the past, we've taken these items to the board and asked for your position, and you've been approving these on a case-by-case basis. But we'd like the ability for staff to be able to move these forward without having to hold it to bring it to the board. So if one of the board member could make a motion for that, for us to be able to approve it in those limited circumstances, that would be helpful.
Dave Stevens has a motion. Do you have a question?
Yes.
Okay.
Is there like a cutoff or when, are there standards for what's considered an unavailable practicum?
we usually ask for a letter from the program. And they say that they don't have the records anymore, or we get something from the program. We
And
don't
so
just
then we
accept that.
substitute a more current
Yes,
reference, so it's not that they don't have to do that reference at all. We
Right.
just amend it.
yes.
Okay, okay, I have a first and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Time.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. The next one is delegation motion for board member panels for military reciprocity discussions.
Okay, so for the bill that changed the way that we look at reciprocity applications for military members and otherwise, there's certain time periods, and we're trying to be diligent about those time periods. So it does say for the reciprocity applicants that are military members, once we have a complete application, the board is to issue a decision within 15 days, which is very challenging. The board does hold meetings once a month where we try to have the board review those timely cases and make decisions, but there probably will be instances to where right after that meeting occurs, we get the last item we need, and there needs to be a decision. So currently, for certain cases, it requires 2/3 vote of the board to approve. Cases with felony convictions, those would still need the whole board. So we may have to do some very short meetings of the board to approve those. But there are also going to be instances to where we have military members that don't require 2/3 vote of the board. And what we were asking for is maybe if the board could delegate authority to, let's say, 3 board members, that if we had these instances to where it was a military member, a military spouse, something with that 15-day time frame, we had everything we needed. If the board could authorize us to just contact 3 board members to review and give us the authority to approve those people, that would be helpful for us.
So moved.
You would just create those as they come up then, or request volunteers as they come up?
Right, I mean, if you wanted to be made up of a certain type, the hearing panels, the board wanted to have someone from that profession, the public member. But if you just wanted to delegate to 3 board members, that would be fine, unless Tim, you have any thoughts on the specific individuals who might serve on those.
No, I don't. The only, I think, exception would probably be felony.
Right.
If they had a felony, like,
If there's cases that still require 2/3 vote of the board, we might have to have just real short board meetings to approve those. But if it's not a 2/3 required, then as the board, to my understanding, has the authority to delegate that to more than the entire board to make those decisions.
Right.
Okay, Dave Anderson has a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign? Okay. Do you want me to refer those to the next meeting, or what would you like to do in our last 3 minutes?
Okay, So for item L, 2 items to be referred to the advisory committees, regulation of artificial intelligence,
Mhm.
and then possibly coming up with language to describe the different professions as a matter of public service so that individuals from the public can understand those differences between the professions a little bit better.
Okay.
In terms of the jurisprudence examination, I talked about the advisory committees
Thanks.
as an alternative to outsourcing that, requiring a fee, making it a requirement of statute. The proposal I brought to the advisory committees was going forward with a launch of a volunteer type program where I would put something together and then advertise it, and we'd give people an hour of continuing education. And it seemed like all the advisory committees were receptive to that, and so just wanted to get your approval as a board to move forward on that.
Okay.
Well,
Great.
one thing, psychology didn't get a chance to discuss it. So we would need to discuss it at our June meeting.
And that's okay. It's gonna take me a little time to put this together, so I'll talk to that advisory committee about it for the June meeting. So
Okay, very good. So I think the one thing we want, go ahead.
there's one more
Yeah.
thing, possible new licensing system.
Okay.
We had a presentation by Acela at the last meeting. Since that time, the board had asked me to check references for the different states that use that. I have been able to contact a few. The reports I got back have been very positive. There also was a meeting of non-cabinet agency leadership recently where they basically said any other agencies that want to move to that system, the implementation cost and the ongoing cost would be covered at least initially by the state, which would be a savings to us. Right now, we're paying about $72,000 per year. So I wanted to convey that to you. See if you wanted me to research any more information or if you had any thoughts on it.
Is there a deadline on the decision for that?
There is not. If I do hear that there is one, I'll let the board know if we need to have a more
Hurry up.
urgent meeting, but that was kind of a bigger thing. It sounded like the ongoing cost would be about $30,000 per year, which was going to be cheaper than this 72, but the implementation costs were averaged around 200,000 or a little more. So, but with the implementation costs being covered by some of the ARPA money, and then at least initially the ongoing cost covered by the state, that's kind of a big impact, I think.
Are you satisfied with these other states that you spoke with about what their review of the service was?
Yeah, from what I've heard back from them, it sounds like they were able to do things they weren't able to do before in terms of paper converting to electronic applications. And some of the things in which they're able to do are much more integrated than what we have here in terms of having a separate payment portal from where you send in your information. So
Is there any need for further discussion, or does the board feel comfortable with having him move forward with implementation?
I'll make one more comment
Okay.
too. It sounded like the state was trying to put a little bit more pressure on agencies to move onto the system too.
Okay.
So that is something also that might be helpful.
I'll keep asking Dave, are you sure it's optional?
Good point.
It is, but sometimes it's
The
helpful to be heavily
savings,
involved.
both in implementation
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
having what we're paying, you know, that seems like a no-brainer if you're satisfied that it's a competent.
I feel the same way.
Okay, so I think we should make a motion to have Dave move forward with implementation of that. Okay, got a Dave has. Laura's on second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. And then Linda, I know, is leaving us, so good to see you, Linda. Our last item of official business is recognition of Jacqueline Lightcap, who's an outgoing board member for this term. Jacqueline, I know from my experience, I've been on a lot of different subcommittees with you, and I just appreciate your service so much. We will definitely miss your input and work on the board.
I appreciate it. I would have loved to have stayed. Talking about all the terms we could have optioned for the thing. I know I could have stayed another 4 years. It's nothing personal. Just had some major things going on in life, and I just don't feel I could give the time to you all that I should all the time. But I have learned so much. This has been I actually feel like I'm just starting to understand it. So thank you all for the time.
Well, and Jackie,
Thank you.
on behalf of the agency, really appreciate all your service. I know you spent years in the complaint review committee and the other advisory committees and all your board work. So
That was my training there.
yes. We're to take the gift out of the bag. We got you a nice little plaque in recognition of your years of service on the board, and really want to say thank you for that, and plan to keep in touch with you in your future endeavors.
Thank you.
Maybe we could all take a picture with her. I don't know if you want to officially adjourn the meeting or not. before we do that.
Let's go ahead and do that after the meeting adjourns.
Okay, well, the next board meeting is Monday, July 8th at 10 a.m. here in the board office. Again, we encourage you to come in person. It's been nice to see so many people and so many faces in the present. There's no other business. We'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. Thank you all. Appreciate your time today. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just skipped that.
Did you get any objections?
Yeah,
to
right.
adjourn?